well in Portugal, resist the temptation to gaze into its depths. The inverted tower in the enigmatic city of Sintra sends chills through those who encounter it as it spirals down a daunting 88 feet into the underground. It certainly wasn't designed to collect water, yet its true purpose remains a closely guarded secret. Dating back to around 1904, this well could have been involved in a mysterious initiation tradition from the Knights Templar. The Templars had faded into history almost 6 centuries before the construction of this pit, but their enigmatic traditions were revived by later generations. So one theory says that candidates seeking to join the group back then had to confront their deepest fears by facing this well, descending its spiral staircase blindfolded. When they reached the bottom of the inverted tower, they removed their blindfolds and were faced with this frightening sight. The only way out of this dark labyrinth was to keep looking up and following the light. Now imagine yourself browsing the shelves of a used bookstore until you find a book with an alphabet you've never seen before. You decide to use an image translation app but find no matches. Intrigued, you buy the book. Then you show it to your friends and family, but nobody recognizes that alphabet. Rare book dealer Winfried Voynich probably experienced the same frustration back in 1912 when he acquired what would later become the most enigmatic book in the world. The work is known today as the Voynich manuscript, and it's written entirely in an unknown language that no one has deciphered yet. The pages of this 15th century codex are filled with botanical drawings, but these aren't typical daisies or roses. In fact, they don't resemble any plant species that we know of. What makes things even stranger is the illustrations of unfamiliar constellations and women swimming in green baths. Delving deeper into the realm of mysterious texts, we set off on a journey to the Qumran Caves near the Salt Sea in the Middle East. In 1952, a team of archaeologists stumbled upon 2 scrolls made of highly oxidized copper at the site. Unrolling them was a major challenge, so they decided to cut the scrolls into 23 parts to investigate them. Imagine their surprise to see Hebrew words like gold and silver popping up. But no, it wasn't an ancient invoice. It was more like a treasure map, pointing the way to over $1 million. Unfortunately, the treasure was never found. Not for lack of trying, though. You see, the quest isn't as easy as it may appear. Some of the copper scroll's vocabulary is technical, and some geographical locations remain a mystery. There's also one last possibility. Perhaps it's all a work of fiction, like a pirate tale from the old days. People talk about Mona Lisa's almost haunting stare that seems to follow you no matter where you stand. But here's a quick question. Does she have eyebrows? You got it right if you said no, and her complete lack of eyebrows adds another layer of mystique to her gaze. The most common explanation is that beauty standards were different, and perhaps plucking the hairs above the eyes was a thing around 1503. But take a look at other Italian paintings from that time, like La Schiavona or Portrait of a Young Girl. Yep, eyebrows. So, not everyone was entirely pleased with this theory, like French inventor Pascal Cotte. He spent 3,000 hours analyzing scans of the painting to dig through all the layers of Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece. Now he claims that the Mona Lisa once had eyebrows, but they disappeared over time due to cleanings and restorations. Some historians, however, still question his findings, which means that Mona Lisa's style, or lack of it, remains an unsolved mystery. So, you decide to travel to Rio de Janeiro, and everyone tells you that Sugarloaf Mountain is a must-see. When you spot the mountain from a distance, you realize that the stone has a cavity. But around noon, the whole view changes. The shadow in that cavity takes the shape of a bird, an ibis to be precise. A local legend links this bird shape to the ancient Egyptian deity Thoth, as if the ancient Egyptians once visited Rio de Janeiro and were somehow inspired by the natural phenomenon. But it's probably just a big coincidence. I mean, literally. The real mystery, however, lies in the waters around Sugarloaf Mountain. In the 80s, archaeologist Robert Marks got a tip from locals about a treasure hidden beneath Guanabara Bay. He dove in and found quite a few Roman amphorae, those ancient vases with two handles. His discovery could potentially provide evidence of a Roman shipwreck that might have reached Brazil 17 centuries before the Portuguese even set foot there. However, he couldn't proceed with his research, and to this day, the idea of the Roman presence on Brazil's coast remains uncertain. The true location of Cleopatra's tomb isn't the only ancient Egyptian mystery. Many secrets are carved into the walls of ancient structures, like in the Temple of Seti I. Take a close look at this hieroglyph, and you'll notice that it resembles a modern-day helicopter. Look to the right, and you'll see an engraving that looks like a submarine. Odd, right? The most reasonable explanation for this has to do with the legacies of different rulers. When a new pharaoh came to power, they had their own hieroglyphs added over the original ones. But this is still a topic of debate, as some Egyptologists believe that these mysterious hieroglyphs may represent some kind of ancient technology. The same applies to the Dendera light. The image found in the underground passageway of the Hathor Temple is a subject of significant controversy in Egyptian history. Some researchers suggest that the inscription simply represents a rising sun, while others interpret it as evidence of some kind of modern lighting system. And it does indeed resemble Crookes' tube, one of the early experiments with electrical discharges. Although there's no concrete evidence of ancient Egyptians having modern electricity, some historians believe that this theory could help explain why many discovered tombs don't have any residues left behind from the use of oil lamps or candles. A lot has been said about the mysterious pyramids of Egypt, but many people tend to forget that other inexplicable structures had already existed even before them. Our next stop takes us to Turkey. The top of a hill known as Gockley Tepe, near the city of Urfa, holds an ancient secret. It features more than 20 circular stone enclosures dated back over 11,000 years. Many of these have heavily carved stone T-shaped pillars adorned with eerie human figures with folded hands. The most accepted theory is that it's the world's first temple, likely used for rituals or social events. But the greatest mystery lies in how it was built, as this site existed before the domestication of animals or the use of metal tools. So the construction must have been very difficult, challenging our understanding of the historical timeline. Now, I hope you're not afraid of heights, because we're about to take a flight over the Nasca lines. You've probably already heard about these massive mysterious drawings etched into an arid region of Peru. They come in many different shapes, like a spider, a monkey, and even a Google-eyed ET that is probably just a fisher. Anyway, this story got some fresh chapters in 2022 when an additional 168 new drawings were discovered. The original ones could only be seen from the air, but these new ones are much smaller and can be observed from the ground. However, one thing they have in common is that their purpose remains totally unclear. Some might call them the largest-scale calendar in the world. Others suggest that they served as a tool for agricultural purposes. Of course, many theories have emerged in an attempt to give the Nasca lines a meaning, but the truth is that they remain some of the most important unsolved mysteries in history. Meet Castello. He's a Brazilian reef octopus. But Castello isn't a regular octopus. While watching him, scientists began to suspect that he might be experiencing nightmares. When he was sleeping, he was changing colors, making some wild movements, expelling water, and even releasing ink. They decided to study Castello for a while. His behavior during sleep resembled stress and fear. The study showed that he might see vivid dreams, which are, at times, spooky. Well, as just one octopus, these cute underwater creatures are known for their intelligence and sometimes human-like behavior, so it's entirely possible that they see dreams just like we do. In Costello's case, he might be haunted by memories of tough times off the coast of the Florida Keys. Poor Costello has a rough past. He lost a tentacle to a predator before captivity. So maybe that's what he sees in his dreams. If proven true, this discovery could reshape how we perceive intelligence and awareness in both animals and humans. Well, it turns out plants can talk. Well, kind of. Scientists found out that plants actually make ultrasonic clicks when they're stressed. Imagine tomatoes and tobacco plants in a jam. They're making sounds like popping bubble wrap, but way too high for us to hear. These are called ultrasonic signals, and they might be their way of indicating stress. That would mean that plants can communicate with each other, and stressed plants prefer to be drama queens and let everybody know about their troubles. They make around 30 to 50 pops and clicks per hour. Calm and healthy plants don't do nearly as much. And not only do plants talk, but even have their own language. They make different sounds depending on whether the plant is experiencing thirst or is bothered by a snipped stem or something else. Moreover, some of them are so dramatic that they start ringing alarms even before they show signs of dehydration, when they know they're getting close to it. Scientists aren't sure why they do that, though. They believe that it might involve cavitation, a term that means air bubbles dancing in the plant's plumbing. Plants that sing these symphonies include corn, wheat, grapes, and even cacti. That is quite a big discovery in agriculture. We could use it to check if our crops are thirsty and stuff like that. So now we'll be eavesdropping on plants and deciphering their secret language. Okay, time for some universal news. Recent studies are shaking up what we thought we knew about the universe's age. Our findings during the last decades showed that the universe must be around 13.7 billion years old. However, a new study shows that it might be almost twice as old, up to 26.7 billion years. Keep in mind that it's not proven, so for now, the official number stays the same. Scientists were using the time since the Big Bang and studying ancient stars to measure the universe's age. But some stars were playing hard to get, looking older than the universe itself. For example, the ancient star Methuselah, which is estimated to be around 14 billion years old, which would be older than our universe. Also, the James Webb Space Telescope caught galaxies looking super mature just a few 100 million years after the Big Bang. All this poses some hard puzzles for astronomers. But this new hypothesis combines the expanding universe theory with something called the tired light theory. It suggests that light loses energy as it zips across cosmic distances. Combine this with the expanding universe theory, and bam! As the universe expands, the light loses energy, so we simply can't see all the super ancient stars that are very far away from us, which is why we could make a mistake in calculating our universe's age. The new model also pushes back when galaxies started forming. It suggests that those early galaxies spotted by the Webb telescope took way longer to form than we originally thought. This study is a serious shakeup in the scientific community. If we made such a huge mistake in calculations, we'd have to rethink the very fundamental astrophysics principles. That would be a giant leap, and we'd have to make a huge makeover of almost everything. Which is why we need to be very cautious about it. So while scientists test this new theory, we just have to wait for the results. Now, these aren't the only space news. The new AI technology is already being actively used for scientific research. This time, AI is helping us to look for signs of extraterrestrial life. Researchers in SETI created machine learning algorithms that would help us sift through the cosmic noise faster and more efficiently. When you point a radio telescope at the stars, it's like turning into a celestial radio station that's full of different signals. We catch everything from pulsars to radio galaxies and earthly interference. Obviously, it would be pretty hard to identify a potential signal from extraterrestrials in all this mess. For over 60 years, scientists had to do all this manually. It was a daunting task to scan the skies and explore countless stars and radio frequencies. But now, AI came to help. The algorithms are trained to recognize and distinguish known interference patterns, like those from mobile phones and electronic devices, amidst the cosmic data. They spot anything deviating from known patterns, the potential needle in the haystack. And we've already had some breakthroughs here. The astronomers caught 8 signals that didn't fit known patterns. While not confirmed as extraterrestrial life, they show that there's a great potential for future research. Going back to animals, this time we're visiting prehistoric Earth. Imagine turtles so massive they make today's turtles look like tiny toys. Recently, scientists stumbled upon the fossilized remains of one of these giants. It's a sea-dwelling titan that cruised the European waters about 80 to 70 million years ago. The discovery was accidental. A hiker in northern Spain stumbled upon fragments of this creature near the Pyrenees Mountains. This turtle was roughly the size of a rhino, around 30 feet in length. Just to give you an idea, this creature would be about the size of an average car. It shows that extreme sizes were more common before an extinction event. The turtles we know now, of smaller, still substantial sizes, dominated afterward. But the ancient oceans were filled with giant turtles munching on mollusks and jellyfish. This discovery also challenges the idea that gigantic turtles were exclusive to North America. The existence of this turtle proves that these colossal reptiles were hanging out in European waters too. So this might be just the tip of an iceberg, and you'll want to steer around that one too. And finally, NASA's James Webb Space Telescope has made a great discovery. It detected a crucial carbon compound in space. It's called methylcation, and this tiny molecule, even if it might seem insignificant, could help us unlock the secrets of interstellar organic chemistry. Carbon is incredibly important. Carbon molecules are building blocks that construct everything from stars to planets to, well, us. It's the key ingredient for life, and scientists are eager to understand how it shaped our existence on Earth, and if it could do the same elsewhere in the universe. And methylcation plays a very important role in the creation of complex carbon-based molecules. That's why it's very cool that we discovered methylcation, even if it's very far away. NASA scientists found it in a young star system. This system is chilling about 1,350 light-years away from us, in the Orion Nebula. The star in this system, which is smaller and a bit weaker than our Sun, is bombarded by intense ultraviolet light from nearby hot, young, massive stars. You'd think such strong UV radiation would destroy complex organic molecules. But the research team believes that it might actually kickstart the formation of these carbon compounds. Maybe stronger stars and their insane radiation levels actually work as energy sources for life. They set off a chemical chain reaction, which results in complex carbon stuff like plants and animals. Seems like we found yet another puzzle piece. So in Westbrook, Maine, people saw an enormous ice disk in January 2019. This disk was like a watery carousel. It was spinning away in the Penobscot River. Residents called it everything from an icy lazy Susan to a frozen spinning wheel. It was estimated to be around 300 feet wide, which made it one of the biggest ice disks ever seen. Weirdly, the spinning ice disk notion isn't new. They've shown up in places like Russia and Washington before. They were almost always a perfect circle. So why do they happen? Well, some scientists in 1997 thought it was because river water created a whirlpool effect around a chunk of ice, smoothing it out to be perfectly circular. Yet, in 2016, other scientists claimed that river currents helped these disks get started, but temperature changes kept them twirling. Warmer water makes the ice melt and sink, creating a vortex that keeps the disk spinning. The warmer the water, the faster it spins. Ever heard of the Hessdalen lights of Norway? They aren't the same as northern lights. Think of these lights as glowing balls. They have been seen since at least the 1930s. These luminous wonders show up in all sorts of colors and shapes. Sometimes they flicker, and other times they just chill in the air. The Hessdalen lights can show up 10 to 20 times a week. They appear both during the day and at night. They can last for just a few seconds or hover for over an hour. Interestingly, nobody has a clue about what exactly they are. The efforts to understand these lights include Project Hessdalen, started in 1983, and later projects like the Triangle Project. Despite ongoing research, there's no consensus on the origin of the lights. Some suggested explanations include misperception of celestial bodies, aircraft, or mirages. One theory ties the lights to airborne dust from mining, while another mentions plasma, formed by ionized air and dust during radon decay. Okay. Ringing rocks is a cool geological thing you probably didn't know about, and it's our next stop on the Mysterious Natural Phenomena Tour. You can find them in Bucks County in the U.S. If you give these rocks a hit with a hammer or another rock, they start ringing. Scientists have been studying them, but the mystery remains. There are different hypotheses about this one too. Things like the size and shape of the boulders and how they're stacked can affect the sounds they make. But that alone doesn't give them the ability to ring. Even though the sound is often described as metallic, it's likely because of the rock's density and internal stress, not just its iron content. A scientific experiment from the 1960s suggested that the ringing ability came from some internal stress, not external weathering. The live rocks, found in the middle of boulder fields, showed expansion or relaxation after being cut, indicating internal elastic stresses. A slow weathering rate in dry fields could cause these stresses. The relic stress theory suggests that these boulders act like guitar strings. A de-stressed boulder gives a dull thud, but a stressed one resonates at different frequencies. The boulders can still ring when removed from their fields, leading to myths about stealing them. Most fields are now cleared of smaller ringers, and breaking large boulders stops the ringing. Large equipment is needed to move the remaining small ringers, weighing over a ton. Now let's talk about the Naga fireballs. They only show up along the Mekong River in Asia. These picky fireballs hang out in just a 155-mile stretch of the river. The reddish glowing balls rise naturally from the water into the air. Their scope ranges from small particles to the size of a basketball. The reported number of fireballs varies from tens to thousands per night. They can be spotted all year round, but they seem to go wild during the full moon in late autumn. Why? Well, that's just another one of their little mysteries. Some have tried to explain the phenomenon scientifically. One theory suggests that flammable phosphine gas from the marshy environment could be the cause. However, skeptics argue that spontaneous ignition isn't likely to be the reason. Another scientific explanation involves free-floating plasma orbs created when surface electricity is discharged into a solution. Still, these typically occur in controlled settings during experiments, and not naturally. We can carry on with ball lightning. It's a super rare thing, a glowing ball that shows up in the air. It likes to make an appearance close to the ground during thunderstorms, hanging out with regular lightning. It can be red, orange, yellow, white, or blue, and it's often accompanied by a hissing sound and a funky smell. This flashy sphere of light is a quick show. It lasts just a few seconds, zooming around, and then poof, it's gone, sometimes quietly, sometimes with a little pop. Ball lightning might seem like a troublemaker, but it's usually harmless. Sure, it's been known to burn or melt stuff on occasion, but it's not out to get us. Scientists aren't entirely sure why it happens or how it's related to regular lightning. People have been tossing around ideas like weird air or gas behavior, high-density plasma stuff, or even a vortex of glowing gases. Even microwave radiation trapped in a plasma bubble is on the list. But don't get it confused with bead lightning. That's a different one, more like a string of beads. And it happens when a bolt of lightning sticks around for a good chunk of a second. Shh! We're now at the Mapimi Silent Zone. It's this spot near this place in Mexico. The story goes that in this desert patch, you can't pick up any radio signals or talk to anyone. In July 1970, a rocket from Utah went off course and landed here. It was carrying some sort of cobalt. Authorities had to haul away tons of soil from the crash site. Now, thanks to the cleanup, the silent zone is wrapped up in myths. People talk about weird magnetic stuff, messing with radios, and about plants and critters going through mutations. Well, locals go with it, boosting tourism in the region. Alright, we can now talk a bit about the sun. Well, it's not just a big ball of fire. It's got an outer layer called the corona. Think of it as an invisible sun jacket made of gases. You usually can't see it because the sun is super bright. But there's a trick. During a total solar eclipse, when the moon slides between us and the sun, the corona shows up, all glowing and white. The corona is scorching hot, even hotter than the sun's surface, which is kinda weird. Scientists are on a mission to crack this heat mystery. They found something called heat bombs shooting from the sun into the corona, exploding and warming things up even more. But that might be just one piece of the puzzle. You see, the sun's surface is like a playground covered in magnetic fields. These magnetic fields create cool shapes on the sun, like loops and streamers. Special telescopes help us see these cool patterns up close. The corona stretches way out into space, and from there, it sends out the solar wind that moves through our solar system. Its particles are so speedy that they escape the sun's gravity. So, there's this cool spot called Kuala Sangalore Beach that you can only check out when the tide is low. The timing changes every day, and you can't get there when the tide is high. Most of the time, it's hiding under the sea, not even on the map. But when the tide's just right, bam, it pops up. Kind of like Malaysia's own version of Salar de Uyuni. People call it the mirror of the sky because when it's not underwater, it turns into a giant reflection of the sky. An awesome spot for cool Instapics. Besides being a sweet travel spot, it's also home to a bunch of marine life, like sea and baby clams that live all over the sandy shores. Now, let's assume that another species, whether humanoid or dolphin-like, could have existed millions of years ago. How do we find their traces? There was a Doctor Who episode about a non-human industrial civilization on Earth that existed long before us. These reptiles, called Silurians, were forced deep underground by a catastrophic rise of temperatures on Earth, and there they thrived for centuries. That inspired scientists to create the so-called Silurian hypothesis. If there was an advanced civilization before us, we should find their traces somewhere. Well, let's try. Climatologist Gavin Schmidt and astrophysicist Adam Frank decided to dive into this themselves. Like us, any technologically advanced civilization would be hungry for energy. So they looked for global effects that would leave a widespread mark. For example, hints of large-scale industrial processes, like plants and factories, and their leftovers. Then comes the question of how long these civilizations would last. If they existed for a long time, we should look for long-lasting signs, like residues from burning fossil fuels, mass extinctions, synthetic chemicals not found in nature, and even traces of nuclear fission. Basically, we should search for the same kinds of things that humans are currently leaving behind as evidence of our activities. Unfortunately, this evidence isn't that easy to find. Let's imagine an unsettling scenario if humanity suddenly disappeared. Even though it seems like we've left a lot of changes on our planet, the future civilization millions of years from now would struggle to find any remnants of our existence. Why? Well, our planet has existed for 4.5 billion years. Complex life on Earth has existed for more than 400 million years. Compared to that, our industrial period only lasted around 300 years, and we haven't left any significant traces. Our record of Earth's history is full of gaps, especially the further back you look. The fossil record captures only some things, being very selective and incomplete. On average, one fossil emerges every 10,000 years, and dinosaur footprints are even rarer. Mountains rise, oceans change, and plate tectonics can easily wipe out evidence of entire civilizations. After a couple of million years, chances are any physical signs of a civilization would disappear. In order to find at least something, we have to look for things like odd sediment patterns or unusual isotopic ratios. Also, fossils mostly form in water, leaving us in the dark about creatures on land or in the jungles. So even if there was a technologically advanced society millions of years in the past, And even if they were far more advanced than us, we might struggle to find any clues of its existence. Frank and Schmidt try to understand how we could ever hope to spot signs of them. Discovering actual cities would be the ultimate proof of a Silurian-style civilization on Earth. But Adam Frank isn't too optimistic. Even now, our cities cover less than 3% of the surface, making it easy to miss ancient city ruins. Whether a city survives over tens of millions of years depends on whether the land around it is sinking, getting locked into a rock, or rising, getting worn away by rain and wind. So places like the French Quarter in New Orleans might have a better shot of making it into the geologic record than, say, Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. When it comes to finding artifacts, the odds are pretty slim as well. No prehistoric iPhone would survive millions of years, fancy glass or not. Finding their fossilized remnants might be a bit more promising, but it's still tricky. Considering modern humans have only been around for about 100,000 years, it's quite possible that we might overlook any traces of an earlier advanced species. There is one thing, though. We could stumble upon their traces in rocks. Our current chaotic era might leave a distinct mark on the Earth's geological history, especially since we're basically experiencing PTM 2.0. I'll get to that in a moment. So they try to look at the changes in the carbon cycle. Humans have been releasing a lot of fossil carbon since the 18th century. This leaves a special mark in the carbon isotope ratio, like a signature that shows the difference between carbon in living things, such as seashells, and carbon in lifeless volcanic rock. Scientists also look for signs in the way sediments are arranged. Large coastal deltas might mean that there were bigger rivers made by folks in this hypothetical civilization. Traces of nitrogen could suggest big-scale farming, where they used a lot of fertilizer. Spikes in metal levels in the sediment could mean runoff from heavy industries. Of course, a single find like that wouldn't tell us anything. Schmidt says the key is to look for multiple signs together. Without clear artifacts, the uniqueness of an event might show in various clues rather than a set of changes linked to a single cause. On a quest for Silurian-style clues, scientists even decided to check the Moon. Some astronomers find it surprising that no one has looked into this before. They even joked about the possibility of dinosaurs building rockets and leaving traces on the Moon or other celestial bodies. These astronomers think that Earth-like planets tend to erase signs of civilizations on their surfaces. So they're exploring the wild notion that these beings might have been space travelers. In that case, remnants of their technology, known as technosignatures, could be lurking not only on our Moon but also on asteroids, or even buried on Mars. There they might endure for millions or even billions of years. Unfortunately, so far, despite digging into the past 380 million years and examining all suspicious events, the researchers haven't found a clear match for a technological civilization. They don't give up, though. Frank calls for more investigation. For example, we could study how modern industrial chemicals stick around in ocean sediments. This, he believes, could help us identify similar chemical traces in the Earth's history. If there are no traces, why do we even bother to find something like that? This research is based on Schmidt and Frank's recent papers. They were delving into the Anthropocene. It's the proposed epoch, dominated by human activities on Earth. It's full of these things called hyperthermals. They're prehistoric events when temperatures on Earth sharply increased over a relatively short time. They're like extreme heat waves from the past. A great example of this is the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM for short. It happened around 55.5 million years ago and saw a rapid rise in global temperatures. Over 200,000 years, the average temperature on Earth jumped from about 9 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. We studied these hyperthermals to understand how they occurred, from natural causes or human activities. So, these hyperthermals sparked the genesis of Frank and Schmidt's research. To study them, scientists started examining chemical signals and tracers left in rocks. When doing that, Schmidt and Frank uncovered some eerie parallels between all the climate issues we have today and past periods of rapid temperature shifts. There's a close similarity between the Pedum and other hyperthermal events. So all this work isn't just about solving a historical mystery. Understanding our impact on the environment can guide us to finding better ways to live in harmony with the planet and avoid becoming a forgotten species in the future. Our Milky Way is filled with lots of planets that could be just right for life, but we don't know if there are other civilizations out there. Earth is the only place we know of with living beings. About 200 years ago, people wondered if there might be civilizations on Mars. Back then, it was a real question. But once we got pictures from space probes, we decided there wasn't any evidence for it, and that idea got stuck in our minds. Now, it's not even considered a valid topic for serious science. It's seen as kind of silly. But no one has set clear limits on what could have happened on our own planet a really long time ago. So, even if there is no proof, we shouldn't throw away the possibility. Don't forget, it took humanity a while to recognize dinosaurs. Maybe Silurians are just patiently waiting for their time.
There's a creature somewhere deep in the ocean looking for prey that would make Dracula himself proud. It's been around since before even the dinosaurs walked the earth. It has no bones or jaw, but it doesn't stop this underwater vampire from hunting. The name of this eel-like parasite is the Pacific lamprey. The English monarch loved this fish so much that he defied doctors' orders to stop eating lamprey flesh. He got sick every time he'd have the original gooey fish. But the lack of bones and the fact that this lamprey tastes like slow-cooked beefsteak made the royal fall in love with the fish once and for all. The product of this love was a chill in his aged body, some heavy sweating, and some other scary symptoms, which eventually took his life and interrupted his 35-year reign. The lamprey is way better at surviving, as it lived through at least 4 mass extinctions. Its ancient ancestors evolved over 450 million years ago. There are around 40 living species of lampreys still thriving across the world. The Pacific lamprey is just one of them. These creatures have cartilage instead of bones, and a third eye, which is a special light-sensing organ on the top of their heads. Instead of a regular jaw, they have a sucker mouth surrounded by teeth. It's perfect for latching onto prey and sipping up body fluids like underwater vampires. Once they pick a victim, they suction it, making a seal that's almost impossible to break. Scientists believe the Pacific lampreys don't munch on flesh. Female lampreys lay up to 200,000 eggs in nests that stay in fresh water for 3 to 4 weeks. Once the larvae hatch, they burrow into sediment and stay under the sand for up to a decade. When they hit their teenage years, these miniature Draculas re-emerge and migrate from freshwater all the way to the Pacific Ocean. This journey isn't the easiest, and it takes some changes to its appearance and physiology to adapt to a huge change in salinity. After several years, they go back to freshwater to reproduce. Pacific lampreys can use chemical clues released by their larval migrating pals to find their way. They can travel hundreds of miles inland to find the perfect spot for spawning and rearing. It's not always the same place they spawned in. Many species of birds, mammals, and other fish can appreciate the fatty flesh of lamprey. This makes them some of the most valuable players in freshwater and marine ecosystems. Another lamprey type, the sea lamprey, is native to the Atlantic Ocean. It's not that dangerous when it's at home, but once it gets to the Great Lakes, it becomes a real threat to the 4 local native species of lamprey. The sea lamprey is up to 4 times bigger than the lake species. It has unlimited food and spawning grounds, and no natural predators here, so it becomes cocky. It secretes an enzyme that doesn't let the blood clot. Once it attaches to some unsuspecting fish, it spends the next several months feeding off of it. And even if the fish shakes the lamprey off, it doesn't have long to live because the mark the predator leaves behind. Sea lampreys aren't interested in humans, but can accidentally latch onto a swimmer. It won't be fatal, but it's not the most pleasant sensation, and you need to get the spot of the impact disinfected. The Australian box jellyfish looks harmless, but it's considered the most venomous marine animal. Unlike other kinds of jellyfish that float with the current rather than swim, this creature can reach an impressive speed and choose its own direction. It has tentacles covered with tiny darts loaded with poison. People and animals that get unlucky enough to meet with those tentacles face some scary and sometimes even fatal consequences in a matter of minutes. Before you decide to never revisit the ocean, you should know that only a few out of around 50 existing species of box jellyfish have venom that is lethal to humans. There are some not-so-dangerous species living in warm coastal waters worldwide. And the most dangerous ones are in the Indo-Pacific region and northern Australia. A blue-ringed octopus spots a signature psychedelic color and the ability to take away your life. This cute-looking sea monster likes to spend its time in the soft, sandy bottom or shallow tide pools and coral reefs. It normally hides in underwater crevices, among shells or debris. If you disturb it, the octopus will activate its tiny color-changing organs and demonstrate its blue rings as a warning signal. The next step will be releasing a venom 1,000 times more powerful than cyanide. This venom is more toxic than that of land mammals. The octopus normally uses it to hunt crabs, shrimp, and small fish by pecking them with its beak and paralyzing them. There is no known antidote for the venom, so if you ever see this sea creature, the best you can do is to stay away from it. It bites without any pain, so you might notice when it's too late. The good news is that it's not aggressive and won't go after you unless it's cornered. The reef stonefish are masters of disguise in the underwater world that camouflage themselves on rocks, coral reefs, or just blend into the seabed. They thrive throughout tropical marine waters of the Indo-Pacific. Their invisibility superpower makes them especially dangerous to their prospective victims they ambush and swallow whole. If someone happens to disturb them, their 13 defensive dorsal spines stand on end and deliver a powerful venom punch. They say stonefish stings are extra painful and lead to scary consequences within minutes. They're called the most venomous fish in the world. If you don't do anything about it, the impact can be lethal. If you ever go diving in the Pacific Ocean, be careful not to pick up a cone snail from the seafloor. It has a beautiful shell made of brown, black, or white patterns. Like most other snails, it's slow, but it has a complicated system of seeking out prey. It likes to snack on fish, marine worms, or even other snails. Once a cone snail senses food is near, it activates a sharp proboscis, or a needle-like protrusion from its mouth. The attack is swift and super potent. The victim doesn't even have time to realize what happened to them. Once it's completely incapable of moving, the cone snail swallows it whole. Humans aren't on its menu, but it can still release the venom if someone steps on it or disturbs it. The proboscis can even penetrate gloves. Luckily, only several out of over 700 species of cone snails can take a human's life. But since there's no antivenom, you better not risk it. All 52 known species of sea snakes living mostly in the warm tropical waters of the Indian and Pacific Oceans are venomous. The beaked sea snake even has the title of one of the world's most venomous serpents, but it's one of the few kinds that can pose a real threat to humans. Sea snakes prefer a peaceful coexistence and would rather slither away than engage in any confrontations. If you ever see them in the water, staying calm and moving slowly will save your life. Sea snake bites, although almost painless at the moment, can have varying degrees of impact. Some may only cause mild symptoms, while others can lead to severe outcomes. Most bite reports come from accidental encounters, like someone freeing them from nets or unsuspecting beachgoers stepping on them. Blue dragons rarely grow larger than the size of a grape. They like to swim belly up, so their brightest blues blend in with the ocean waters. And the silver front faces down and camouflages with the darker seabed. Blue dragons feed on another dangerous sea creature and store up their stinging cells. Their venom lives on even after the fish itself is no longer alive. That's why you should be extra careful and never pick up or step on them on the beach.
There's a ship drifting somewhere in the ocean without a crew. The last time someone saw it was over 50 years ago. Its story reminds of that of the Flying Dutchman, a ship that's bound to sail forever and bring disaster to whoever sees it at sea. At least the legend says so. Unlike the Flying Dutchman, the SS Baychimo was definitely real and built for a German company in Hamburg and began as an ordinary cargo ship. It was trading supplies between Hamburg and Sweden in the Baltic Sea starting from 1914. It had a strong steam engine and a hull made of steel. A few years later, it became British property. Then, in the 1920s, a Canadian company purchased it for around $18,000, a huge amount of money back then. The new owner, the Hudson's Bay Company, was actively using the ship for several years. They would often send it on voyages from its home port in Scotland to Siberia, Alaska, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. It also passed through the Panama Canal and even the Suez Canal, with fur pelts for sale on board. Sometimes it would also transport passengers. It had completed 9 successful voyages before this strip of good luck came to an end. Starting from the 1930s, SS Baychimo would have trouble with ice and storms. When it first got trapped in ice in October of 1931, some of the crew managed to escape to Alaska. 15 of 22 sailors decided to stay with their vessel and try to save it. They had furs and other valuable cargo worth around $58,000 aboard. The company sent them supplies to survive the winter. They set camp near the ship out of the hatches, tarpaulins, and other materials, and offloaded the cargo. At the end of November, a blizzard rushed through the area, and it seemed like it had taken the ship with it. The ice platform had survived, but the ship broke free. Some of the crew members were sure it had sunk. But soon after, they heard from one of the locals who had spotted their ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew moved on with their lives, and the ship started its journey as a runaway vessel. People would spot SS Baychimo once a year or so, all the way until 1965. It was mostly spotted off the coast of Alaska. A man going to Nome with his sled dog, along with prospectors, explorers, and treasure hunters, all claimed to have seen SS Baychimo. Someone tried to board it and take it to port, but ended up stranded on it for days because of horrible weather. Others got luckier and managed to take a whaleboat, some furniture, and other valuables from the vessel. Those who got close to the ship saw that it was damaged and missing the propeller. Still, it stayed afloat without a crew for at least 38 years and became the longest sailing ghost ship in history. In 2006, the Alaskan authorities started a project to solve the mystery of this ghost ship of the Arctic and finally find SS Baychimo, either still above or below the water. So far, the project has not been a success. SS Baychimo remains one of the estimated 4,000 ships that have disappeared off Alaskan shores. If the legend of the 17th century isn't lying, this ghost ship could be sailing somewhere along the Flying Dutchman. It belonged to the Dutch East India Company. Its captain managed to do the impossible for that time and sailed from Holland to Indonesia in only 3 months. They said he was flying over the sea, and some evil tongues explained that he had made a deal with evil forces to achieve that. Once the ship was sailing back home, its captain and crew disappeared without a trace. There are many versions of what happened to it. One of the first ones said it had tried to enter port at the Cape of Good Hope, got in a terrible storm, and sank as there was no captain to save it. Another legend says the captain had refused to obey the skies to let the ship sink during the storm. A scary life form then struck the boat and the crew, and it was condemned to forever wander without rest. Many sailors claim to have spotted the wandering Dutchman. The Duke of York, who was to become King of England, mentioned having seen it in Australian waters. Right after spotting the ship, the man who saw it first fell from the top of the mast and didn't survive. There were more encounters with this legendary ship up to the middle of the 20th century. Ships would nearly collide with it as the Flying Dutchman jumped out of the blue. Scientists have a more logical explanation for this mystery: Fata Morgana, not to be confused with Hakuna Matata. Now, when you're out at sea on a hot day and the air is all wavy, it feels like when you look at the road on a scorching summer day. That's because of something called atmospheric refraction. When light passes through different layers of air with different temperatures and densities, it bends and twists. Sometimes, under certain conditions, this bending of light can create really bizarre optical illusions over the ocean, like sightings of the Flying Dutchman. The Fata Morgana phenomenon can make distant objects appear distorted, stretched, or even lifted above the horizon. So you can see a ship far away, but because of the way the light is bending, it will look like it's floating above the water or even disappearing and reappearing. A Fata Morgana is most commonly seen in polar regions, especially over large sheets of ice that have a uniform low temperature. But you can see it anywhere, even in deserts and over lakes on hot days. The first stories about ghost ships go all the way back to ancient Greek and Roman mythology. One of the most famous ghost ships in history is the Mary Celeste. This brigantine was traveling from New York City to Genoa and was fully stocked with provisions, but missing a crew when it was discovered in the Atlantic Ocean in 1872. The crew's personal belongings were also there, completely undisturbed. The final entry in their log was made 10 days earlier. We still don't know what happened to its crew, and the ship has inspired many spooky stories and legends. The Lady Lovibond was another legendary schooner that is believed to have been wrecked off the coast of Kent in the middle of the 18th century. The story tells that the ship's captain, Simon Reed, had just got married and took his bride on board for a celebratory cruise, despite the superstition that it could bring bad luck. They were on their way to Portugal when the first mate, who is also in love with the captain's new wife, went mad because of jealousy, attacked another crew member, and then took over the wheel and steered the ship straight into the dreaded Goodwin Sands. No one aboard survived, and the schooner is said to reappear as a ghost vessel every 50 years. In present times, many vessels become abandoned and turned into ghost ships intentionally. There are thousands of them floating in U.S. rivers, lakes, channels, and coastal waters. Some people lose their boats in storms and other extreme weather. Others have to abandon their boats because maintaining them can cost 10% of the boat's price. Plus, docking a vessel can add up to several $1,000s every year. Most boats have been made of fiberglass, so an owner can't just recycle them as scrap metal. So, once they want to get rid of it, they often tie it to a dock and sneak away, or leave it floating far away from the shore, or just try to sink it. When ghost ships sink in shallow waters, they can cause damage to coral reefs, mangroves, marshlands, oyster habitats, and wetlands. Plus, they can collide with unsuspecting regular ships and cause real trouble. So, don't do that. Enough said. Unlike many other ancient Egyptian burial grounds, King Tutankhamun's tomb stayed hidden and free of unwanted thieves for 3,000 years. One reason was that the tomb was smaller than average and tucked away in a place called the Valley of the Kings. This area was already being extensively explored by the time they stumbled upon Tut's spot. The entrance was all covered in debris from building a nearby tomb, which must have also helped keep it a secret. There were also zero writings or signs on the outside of the tomb. Time passing also played a part in keeping it in amazing shape until the 1920s, when a man named Howard Carter finally made it in. But was Carter that big of a hero? Some recent findings say he might have been sneakier than initially thought. People used to think Carter wasn't just a glorified treasure hunter, he was a true archaeologist. Before Tut, he had been on a relentless quest for Egyptian artifacts. He discovered his interest in these unusual objects when he was a child, and soon started drawing the sculptures and inscriptions that were found in ancient tombs. After stumbling upon the remains of King Tut, Carter spent a decade recording and processing all sorts of objects, like golden thrones, chariots, and statues from Tut's tomb, shipping them down the Nile to Egypt's museum in Cairo. Well, at least that was the official story. More recent discoveries claim that not all of the objects made it to Egyptian officials. A secret letter seems to uncover Carter's little 10 for them, 1 for me policy. The letter in question was sent to Sir Alan Gardiner, a philologist and friend of Carter's, dated from 1922. In these writings, Carter mentioned having found the tomb and was asking his buddy for some advice. In another letter from 1934, Gardner seems to be thanking Carter for an amulet, which was sent to him as a thank you gift. Carter was adamant that it didn't come from Tut's tomb, but evidently it did. Even the British director of the Egyptian Museum was onto Carter's sneaky endeavors, but couldn't prove it. He compared Gardner's amulet to others from Tut's tomb, and lo and behold, they were a perfect match. Gardner was so disappointed to have been put in such a sticky situation that he vented to Carter in another letter. Deciding to be a good friend, Gardner didn't throw the famous archaeologist under the bus. Instead, he advised Carter to take those stolen goods back to Cairo, just like he'd advise you to like this video and subscribe to the Brightside channel for more amazing videos on the most unique topics in history. It's not the only shady piece of information on Carter's post-discovery behavior. In 1947, a man named Alfred Lucas, who used to work with a controversial archaeologist, gave some information in an obscure journal in Cairo. He claimed that Carter sneakily cracked open the burial chamber door himself. Then he sealed it back up like nothing had happened before the official uncovering. Now, why would he do that? Well, the same theory suggests that Carter and his crew might have entered the tomb early so they could get their hands on some ancient goodies. Obviously, these people couldn't risk having such objects sold while they were still alive, but made sure they were auctioned off after they passed. Carter, though, never confessed to anything. He made no official denial either, but the Egyptian government couldn't risk any more mysterious disappearances, so they prohibited him from entering the tomb for a while. Some have connected this apparent stealing to the curse of King Tut. If you've never heard of it, know that it became quite the scary tale soon after King Tutankhamun's resting place was uncovered. It claimed that anyone messing with the tomb of the boy pharaoh would face some serious bad luck. It's not all dramatic like a mummy going on an aggressive spree, but word got out that the people involved in disturbing King Tut's lair met some mysterious, untimely ends. The main untimely passing related to this supposed curse is that of George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. He was this British aristocrat who helped fund the search for the tomb. He passed away just a year after the tomb was opened. Now, people love to call it mysterious, but it turns out that Herbert was already in pretty bad shape health-wise when he got to Cairo, and he ended up getting taken down by a regular disease. Now, let's talk numbers. There were a lot of people linked to this tomb opening – security guards, archaeologists, and supporting staff. And sure, a few of them did pass not long after the tomb started receiving visitors. As much as we'd like this curse to be true for the sake of, good storytelling, statistically, if you have a bunch of people connected to opening a tomb, you'd expect some passings just by random chance. The average lifespan for those supposedly targeted by the ancient curse was more than 20 years after the spell was supposed to kick in. Herbert's daughter even lived until the 1980s, that's half a century later. And Howard Carter himself lived until 1935, a solid 16 years after the big reveal. Some have suggested that the whole curse was nothing more than a careful PR strategy. You see, when Tut's tomb was found, Howard Carter wanted to make a priority out of keeping nosy reporters away, so he might have come up with a curse hanging over anyone entering the boy king's resting place. But what was stolen from King Tut's tomb anyway? Well, some jewelry to begin with. It might have been snatched by Howard Carter himself, according to a French specialist. He did some intensive research by looking at old pictures taken from inside the tomb back in the 1920s. He compared those images to various objects from museums and auction houses. He soon started to piece together the whereabouts of some of Tut's jewelry. First up, there's this collar that used to be on Tut's chest. It was all broken into pieces, and some parts went via Carter to the Nelson Atkins Museum in Missouri. Meanwhile, other bits ended up on a necklace owned by some unnamed people who tried to sell it in 2015 but failed. Even the Nelson Atkins Museum agrees, as they've confirmed the information on their website. Then there's a headdress piece. Some beads from it that once belonged to Tut apparently got stolen by Carter too. They were also strung into a necklace and are now being held at the St. Louis Art Museum. Another fancy collar made out of glazed ceramic magic spent some time at the Met, far away in New York. Thankfully, it was sent back to Egypt a bit over a decade ago. This seems to have been, as you'd expect by now, also stolen by Carter. Missing artifacts aside, King Tut still gave a ton of amazing objects that helped us learn more about this incredible ancient culture. Starting with the famous burial mask. It's this massive 21-inch gold art piece with semi-precious stones and glass paste. It weighs 22 pounds and showcases the boy pharaoh with a long beard and a headdress with a cobra and vulture. On the back, there's this spell from an important ancient Egyptian spiritual book that's supposed to make sure it works just as well in the afterlife. Tut was also apparently a board game enthusiast. They found 4 board games in his tomb, some made of ivory. Archaeologists also found a pair of gold sandals, though you'd imagine they were more for show than for comfort. In fact, the pharaoh probably never wore them in his lifetime. Now, speaking of fashion items, it turns out Tut was quite the fancy ruler. They even found a mannequin in his tomb that was used to pick out, adjust, and store his outfits and jewelry. The boy king seemed to have also enjoyed some music, based on the 2 trumpets historians found in his tomb. Though they were played back in 1935 in a BBC broadcast, the instruments are today considered too fragile to be maneuvered. Okay, here's a quick pop quiz on geography and touristy stuff. What's the biggest city in Italy? Did you say Rome? Then you got it right. Rome has a population of over 2 million people. And what would you say is the current population of Venice? Well, that's a tricky one to know by heart. But to answer correctly, in 2022, it was a little over 258,000 people. Now, what if I told you that for 80% of them, the Venice they live in isn't the tourist and historical one with all the canals? It's rather the other side of town. If you know someone who's traveled to Venice before, they may have sent you a postcard with an image of a gondola in a canal. I bet you never imagined that Venice could also just look like this, just a regular old Italian city. As tourists, we have a strong misconception about what Venice is. We think the real Venice is what we see in the movies. Well, I hate to be the one to pop your illusion, but there's more to Venice than straight canals and old bridges. Here are the boundaries of the real Venice. Probably the postcards you get only picture this bit of the city called Centro Storico, or Historical Center. But the city also includes the mainland, called Terra Firma, where most Venetians live today. The interesting thing to look at is how the number of people living in the historical center has decreased over the years. From then on, the number started to reduce more with each passing year. Today, only 50,000 people can afford to live there. To understand that, let's travel back in time for a moment. Before Venice became an important Italian city, it was nothing but a fisherman's village. It was only around the 5th century that people decided to take a chance and build on the marshy ground of the Venetian islands. If you've ever wondered how Venice holds up, let's just say it's due to strong blocks of wood driven deep into the ground. As it turns out, you need oxygen and water to ruin wood, and in marshy soils, there isn't much oxygen, so the buildings were safe. It was during the Middle Ages that Venice became one of the world's most important maritime empires. You might remember that's where Marco Polo, the famous merchant and explorer, came from. The city was extremely well located, right in the Adriatic Sea, and had access to huge commercial empires of the time, like the city of Constantinople. At that time, the most prestigious jobs you could get were like the ones Marco Polo had, anything related to long-distance trading. Since then, Venice consists of 118 islands, and some say there are around 400 bridges in the city. Quick question here, can you name at least 2 of the most famous Venetian islands? Let's start with Burano. The island of Burano is famous for its lace making and its super colorful landscape. FYI, Burano is also home to a less famous leaning tower than the one in Pisa. It's called the Tower of Burano. And then there's the island of Murano. They are famous for their products of fine glass. You can find anything from huge vases to water glasses, jewelry, and so on. They're quite exquisite, but also super expensive. But you know what they say, time changes everything. In the 20th century, Venice was no longer the trading hub it once was. Its economic power was failing seriously, so the city decided to invest in something else, its historical value. And the best way they found how to do that was through preservation. Let's face it, if you're a tourist who enjoys history, you would jump at the opportunity of visiting a UNESCO heritage site, wouldn't you? Initially, this was rather good for the city. But the thing is, as tourism in Venice skyrocketed, the old dynamics of the city started to change to keep up with the intense tourism. Truth is, in our day and age, lots of tourists rather buy small and cheap souvenirs than invest their money in expensive manufactured goods, such as the classic Murano glasses. The traditional Venetian stores that were open hundreds of years ago just didn't have the economic power to compete with new stores that opened to cater specifically for tourists. And then, what happened next is something we often call falling down the rabbit hole. Because, as it turned out, tourists attracted more tourists, and Venice lost control over it. The maximum sustainable number of tourists in Venice would be around 22,500 people per day. But in 2021, Venice saw up to 80,000 tourists per day in certain parts of the year. If you remember that there are only 50,000 people living in Venice's historical center nowadays, that almost means that tourists outnumber locals by 2 to 1. This is what gave Venice one of its current nicknames amongst the locals, which is a short-term city. I mean, if you live in a touristy city such as New York City or Paris, you'd be sure to avoid the parts of the city that are more touristy. But in Venice, that's difficult, since we're talking about several small islands. Whether you want it or not, the city is constantly packed. Locals started to complain that things such as getting a table at a restaurant or crossing an important square, such as Piazza San Marco, would take hours. Not to mention that instead of normal car traffic, well, in Venice you can experience some gondola traffic. But that's not even the worst that's been happening. As the number of tourists per year started to rise exponentially, so did the infrastructure to accommodate all these people. When landlords understood that they could make more money off of tourists than they could with locals, overall prices started to soar. That's why from the 1950s onward, fewer Venetians were able to continue living in the city's historical center. Landlords decided to more than double the prices of housing. So, a family that paid around 800 euros for their apartment now had to pay something around 1,500 euros to stay in the same place. And social services couldn't even do anything about it because there were so many similar cases happening all over the historical center. This may sound like something small, but when you stop to look at the big picture, it's changing the social fabric of the city. Yep, that's what usually happens in super touristy places. France is having to deal with a similar problem of over-tourism. France's Ministry of Tourism has concluded that tourists are spending less money yet over-exploiting the classic tourist landmarks. Cities are made up of much more than just buildings and infrastructure. As urban sociologist Georg Simmel said, cities need to be heterogeneous, and by raising the prices of rent so much, the first ones to be kicked out of the city were the younger generations. After that, only well-established elderly people could afford to stay in the city center. Things started getting so out of hand in Venice's historical center that UNESCO itself threatened to put the city on its list of heritage sites in danger of severe damage. That's tough, huh? The city is still trying to find ways to mitigate the effects of tourism. The first thing they did was to ban those huge cruise ships from stopping in the city's historical area. Oh, and the city produced a tourism fee. Normally, anyone sleeping in the historical center already pays a fee. But nowadays, tourists have to register their entry and pay a daily fee for exploring the main island. The profits from this fee are directed toward making life in Venice's city center more affordable. Hopefully these policies will allow Venetians to move back to Venice's city center. Ciao! When we think of active volcanoes, one region comes to mind, the Ring of Fire in the Pacific Ocean. 3/4 of Earth's volcanoes sit within this belt. Compare the area to Australia, which doesn't have any volcanic activity. The old continent of Europe is also calm, or at least we like to think so. Can you guess what the most active volcano in Europe is? If you thought of Mount Etna on the island of Sicily in Italy, you were right. The volcano has erupted about 200 times and has been far from sleeping in recent decades. The last time this happened was in August 2023. The highest mountain in the Mediterranean is 500 million years old. But in Iceland, there is a much younger volcano. It sprang into action on the 10th of July 2023. In the afternoon, 3 fissures appeared in the ground on a peninsula in the southwest of the island. This was at a base of a small mountain peak. Its name means Little Ram in the local language. The volcano spewed molten lava high into the air. There were also gas plumes in the area. But the scientific community wasn't surprised by the event. They already knew about the volcanic area that stretches between the cities of Reykjavik and Keflavik. Its name is hard to pronounce. Hey, I want to buy a vowel. It had already erupted during the previous 2 summers. This activity came after 8 centuries of dormancy. In the days leading up to the latest eruption, seismologists, the scientists who study earthquakes, recorded over 12,000 tremors. When the ground opened up in July, the fissures were over 1.5 miles long. The following morning, 2 of them closed. All the lava was now coming out of the last fissure. It grew into an elongated cone, the simplest shape of volcano we are all familiar with. The lava soon filled a large crater. It grew almost 100 feet tall during the first week, and it is still growing. On the night when the eruption started, lava spread out in all directions. Its cinders set ablaze the dry moss in the vicinity. Local authorities closed off the surrounding area. There were toxic gases from the volcanoes and smoke from the burning moss. Firefighters flocked to the area. After a week, they proclaimed the area safe. Visitors soon came to witness the birth of Europe's youngest volcano. This form of tourism is quite developed in Iceland. People come from all over the world to watch active volcanoes. The land of fire and ice is home to more than 130 volcanoes. Some 30 of them are active. Now, I know what you're thinking right now. Is volcano tourism safe? In Iceland, it is. The country's authorities research and constantly monitor all of the hotspots. The island is dotted with several dozen seismic stations. These help researchers accurately predict future eruptions, and emergency services are accustomed to these sorts of events. They can quickly cordon off danger zones. This is what happened in 2010. A volcano in the south of the island, the name of which everyone struggled to pronounce, erupted. It spewed out a plume of steam and ash that was 7 miles high. This wasn't a fun time to be an air traveler. Winds carried the enormous plume southeast toward northern Europe. Many countries closed their airspace for several days for safety reasons. The volcano erupted in March, but the Earth was shaking from January the same year, so seismologists knew that an eruption was approaching. When it comes to the continent's youngest volcano, the tourist infrastructure is already there. Visitors can leave their cars at a designated parking lot. Then they go on a 5-hour-long trek. This leads to a viewing deck. Tourists are so close to the epicenter that they can feel the heat haze from the crater. The sight is the most impressive at nighttime. Safety is never a concern. Scientists regularly chart out hazard maps that outline the borders of lava fields. This way, visitors who stick by the rules are never in harm's way. More than a week after the eruption started, a section of the crater collapsed. Lava flowed downhill west of the volcano. This majestic smoldering hot river is slow-moving lava. Scientists categorize it as an AA type. The term is Hawaiian. It describes basaltic lava that has a rough and brittle surface. The flow is composed of broken lava blocks that are called clinkers. They fall off as the substance flows. This reveals red-hot areas. The cooler sections of lava are gray and black in color. When it moves forward, it produces a distinctive sound like shattering glass. Nearly a month after the eruption of the new volcano, we got aerial footage of an interesting phenomenon. A tornado formed directly over the lava flow. This occurs due to the high temperatures in the area. When the conditions are right, a column of heated air can easily turn into a mini tornado. Scientists observed a similar event happen during the 2018 eruption of Mount Kilauea in Hawaii. The lava fields of Europe's second-largest island tell the story of the creation of Iceland. It sits above the place where the North American and Eurasian plates meet each other. Tectonic plates are huge, rocky chunks of Earth's most outer layer. There are roughly 20 of them. They rest on a partially molten layer of rock. All the lava we see on the surface starts its journey here. You could say that these plates float on molten rock. Their boundaries are unstable, so when two plates grind past each other, they release tremendous amounts of energy. The formation of volcanoes is one result. These are places where the molten rock travels upward to the surface. Iceland began to form some 60 million years ago. The tectonic plates under the ocean drifted apart. Enough lava piled up on the surface to create solid ground. This ancient rock is under the waves today. As new lava reaches the surface and cools down, it pushes the old rock away from the center of the island. That's why the oldest parts of Iceland aren't 60, but only 16 million years old. The country's active lava fields are young in geological terms. Some of them are under 1,000 years old. Scientists consider the island a hot spot for volcanoes, pun intended. Nearly a third of the basaltic lava that reaches the Earth's surface in recorded history came from Icelandic eruptions. Fissure swarms, like the ones before the 2023 eruption, cover 30% of the Nordic country. For this reason, only a quarter of the island is inhabited. Norse Vikings were the first people to settle in Iceland at the beginning of the 10th century. Nature threw them a loud welcoming party. Just a few years after their arrival, they witnessed one of the greatest volcanic eruptions in history. Vikings came from a region without volcanoes, so they had no clue as to what was going on. Today, Icelanders are used to such events. This is good because their homeland is entering a new era of volcanic activity. Volcanologists suspect that recent events are an introduction to decades of more frequent eruptions. The peninsula that is home to Earth's youngest volcano is just 17 miles southwest of Iceland's capital city. It's been dormant for a long time. Present-day eruptions there are a reminder that the natural processes that created Iceland are still ongoing. Recently, scientists discovered that there's a historical link between volcanic eruptions in the north of Europe and glaciers. Our planet went through at least 5 major ice ages. These were exceptionally lengthy periods when the average temperature on Earth dropped. The result was the expansion of ice sheets across northern Europe and North America. The last ice age ended some 10,000 years ago. Researchers are still trying to fully understand how these glacial periods affected volcanic activity. They suspect that the sheer weight of all that ice disrupts the flow of magma underground. When glaciers retreat, the pressure is lifted. This makes it easier for lava to flow upward to the surface where it bursts.
Suppose everyone in the world wants to do this, and countries started investing billions of dollars in this project. In that case, we can colonize the ocean floor. The question is, why would we need this? For the same reason we're going to colonize Mars, to save Earth from overpopulation. Why do we need to move to the red planet in the near future if we can live underwater? It'll be cheaper, safer, and most importantly, not far from our home. You don't need to stay in cryocapsules for years to wake up hundreds of millions of miles away from your planet. It's much easier to take an elevator down to the underwater city, hang out there, and enjoy the views of marine nature. Besides, staying on Mars will surely cause severe mental problems for people. Panic, stress, and the realization that you can't return to your home whenever you want can put serious pressure on your mind. It's better to live under millions of tons of salt water, and the reason why we have to do this is a need for more resources. There are about 8 billion people on Earth right now. Some experts think that when the number reaches 10 billion, the world will begin to run out of food, fresh water, and fuel. Agriculture and other industries simply won't be able to develop so quickly. Resources will be depleted, and people will have to do something to survive. The colonization of the ocean is an ideal solution to the problem. Firstly, we have very little information about the ocean. We've studied space much better than the ocean on our planet. Most likely, vast reserves of fuel are hidden under the seabed. Secondly, we will be able to reduce the load on our planet by about 50% if we move to live in the ocean. Thirdly, there will be no problems with logistics. Delivering food, necessary equipment, and construction materials will take hours, and if something breaks along the way, you can return to the surface and try to deliver it again. Sending things to Mars would be much more complex and expensive. Imagine that halfway there, millions of miles away from Earth, something breaks down on the spaceship with provisions. Then you'll have to wait for many years for the next delivery. But the main reason for ocean colonization is protection from disasters and natural cataclysms. Volcanic eruptions, radioactive winter, earthquakes, tornadoes, and floods. We could easily wait out any disaster underwater. Yeah, there are volcanoes on the ocean floor too, but the consequences of their eruptions are not so dramatic. The water immediately cools the lava and prevents ash from spreading. We will never experience the consequences of fire again. No burning forests and polluted air. And speaking about the air, there's a lot of oxygen in the ocean. More than half of the oxygen reserves on the planet are replenished by the sea, thanks to algae and phytoplankton. So don't worry, we'll be able to breathe deeply. The main thing is to figure out how to do it underwater. When humanity decides to take such a global step and begins to colonize the ocean, we will first have to adapt our bodies to high pressures. There's such a thing called saturation diving. Before descending into the depths, you must inhale compressed air. The nitrogen and oxygen quickly dissolve in your blood and exert pressure on your body from the inside. At the same time, the water pushes on it from the outside. In simple terms, your body is in balance and you don't feel bad. Divers use this method when exploring the seabed at great depths. Therefore, when people begin to colonize the ocean, they will dive there wearing cylinders with compressed air and an oxygen mask. The main rule is to surface slowly. You need to wait until the compressed air completely dissipates inside your body. If this isn't done and you rise to the surface, then you will feel intense pressure from the inside. Nitrogen will start acting in your veins like soda bubbles when you shake a can with the drink. After this adaptation, we will start building cities, roads, and stations that will transfer people to dry land and back. It shouldn't be too difficult because we already have the technologies needed for the underwater lifestyle. Welcome to the Aquarius Reef Base, located at the bottom of the Florida Keys Marine Reserve. This is a small laboratory where 6 people can live for 10 days. Scientists working there study coral reefs, marine plants, and fish. The lab doesn't look modern. It resembles a sunken, rusty bathyscaphe overgrown with shells and other underwater stuff. To create buildings with more beautiful designs, people will need new technologies for underwater construction. So let's imagine that global colonization has begun. Engineers use durable stainless metals and other materials capable of withstanding high pressure. With the help of freight elevators, people lower everything needed for large-scale construction to the bottom. Stations with such elevators appear in all the seas and oceans. Workers build huge underwater constructions on dry land. Then, large ships deliver them to the stations. From there, they descend to the bottom, where scuba divers and robots set these houses on the ocean floor. Every building is like a giant submarine with lots of apartments. They look ordinary from the inside, except for the underwater view from the window. To reduce waste emissions, engineers build huge capsules in every city, where garbage is destroyed by high water pressure. People try to live closer to the shore because they want to spend less time commuting. This causes severe pollution in coastal areas. Builders set up communication between the stations and land by creating vacuum tunnels with high-speed trains inside. In simple words, this is an underwater subway, only much faster than the one on dry land. From now on, people move farther from the shore to live in cleaner water. Humanity begins to make daily life in underwater cities more comfortable when the main construction is over. Scientists create filters that can quickly purify seawater. Now, everyone has a faucet that takes water directly from the ocean and turns it into fresh water. Also, constructors put in air filters capable of extracting oxygen from the water. Electricians create underwater mills to generate energy. To leave home, a person must put on a diving suit and cylinders with compressed air and exit through an airlock. People swim between buildings and talk to one another using radio communication. For faster movement, car companies produce small bathyscuffs with locked cabins and powerful propeller systems. Over time, engineers create large domes where you can walk and breathe fresh air, like on land. Global clothing brands develop fashionable diving suits and practical accessories for comfortable underwater movement. For example, you can attach a small heater to your clothes to not freeze while swimming. And you can also put on wider fins with engraved brand symbols. To make such a lifestyle as comfortable as possible, scientists and biologists create masks that work like gills and provide a person with oxygen extracted from the water. Constant exposure to high pressure changes people's physiology over time. In the water, we need to put more effort into moving. People who often leave their homes lose a lot of calories. They become slimmer and their muscles get stronger. Look at the Olympic swimming champions. Now, almost all underwater citizens have the same developed shape. Our body temperature is falling, and evolution slowly turns us into cold-blooded creatures. A lack of sunlight makes our skin paler, and we start resembling amphibians. We learn more about deep-sea creatures such as the giant squid and other monsters. Almost every month, scientists discover new species. But at the same time, many fish species disappear because of human activity in the ocean. The extraction of natural resources from under the seabed heavily pollutes the water. To reduce the load on the planet, people decide to colonize the sky. But this is a topic for another video. Something exciting and kinda unexpected popped out among the rocks of the Ica Valley in Peru. The bones of a really old whale that lived almost 40 million years ago. At first, no one was really impressed because the bones they found were big and weirdly shaped, so people just thought they were looking at giant boulders. I mean, that's cool too, but things got way better when they realized those were the remains of a very large, ancient animal that roamed along the coast of ancient Peru. Plus, it was probably the heaviest creature that ever lived. Sorry, blue whale, I know you worked hard to get to the top. The length of over 100 feet and weight of more than 200 tons brought you the status of the biggest animal on our planet. But it seems you've held the title long enough. Time to hand it over to our next candidate, and that one's really gigantic. This ocean beast was probably shorter than the blue whale, but heavier, with a weight that could be between 93 tons and 370 tons. If it's closer to the higher number, it'll make Perucetus the biggest animal ever known to have lived on Earth. And it seems its weight was the result of having extremely thick, dense bones. You can see such bones today in manatees or some other early whales. Dense bones are a great tool for such marine mammals. This feature makes them heavy and allows them to stay submerged most of the time. But at the same time, if their body was too heavy, they would end up sinking all the time, and they would waste too much energy to move back up to the surface. So, to avoid sinking, marine mammals need to have enough lighter tissues, like muscles and fat, to help them float in the water without using too much energy. Now, scientists didn't have the whole skeleton, which makes it hard to tell how big the animal was. But they used the ratio of the heavy bones to the lighter tissues in other marine mammals to estimate the overall weight of this giant ancient whale. Experts found these fossils about 13 years ago and spent the next decade freeing the whale from the rock. Its anatomy and age showed this whale was a cousin of Basilosaurus, a whale that had a long snout full of sharp teeth, and a sleek body similar to that of an eel. Even if Perucetus wasn't bigger than the blue whale, it was still a giant that ruled the ocean depths. Unlike modern whales, there's a possibility that this ancient fellow was a predator that liked to go after bigger prey. And this also changes how we see the history of whales. Scientists used to think these magnificent creatures became really big about 5 million years ago when they started eating lots of small creatures. But here's the proof that giant whales existed even before that. But it's still unclear how this whale managed to find enough food to sustain its enormous body. Plus, it's still hard to tell what exactly this ancient creature had on its menu. It was pretty large and not such a fast swimmer, so it's possible it searched for food in shallow waters. Then it probably ate crustaceans, clams, or some other small animals hiding in the sand. One theory says it was a scavenger, which basically means it munched on remains of everything that would come its way. It's not so unusual to find marine animals in deserts. Many of these regions used to be covered with water anyway. The Sahara in Africa is a perfect example. About 50 to 100 million years ago, this was not a dry desert, but a shallow saltwater body called the Trans-Saharan Seaway. The land is not wet there anymore, of course, but people who lived in that area knew about it because they used to find old shells across the desert. The sea was about 164 feet deep. That sounds enough for a nice swim. Some would say this area looked like modern Puerto Rico, with lots of sun and shallow water. Mangrove forests were a common thing as well as seafloors covered with mollusks, like snails and clams. The marine sediment that was left behind after the sea had dried up is full of different fossils. And the animal that lived in that ancient underwater world didn't look friendly. Plus, they were much bigger than their relatives from modern times, so a regular-sized human would end up as a snack, not even a whole meal. Normally, when animals live on small islands, they can become much bigger than their relatives from the mainland. This is something we call island gigantism, and it happens because there are more resources or fewer predators on islands. Maybe the same thing happened in the Trans-Saharan Seaway. Even though it wasn't an actual island, the water moved in and out, which created little pockets of water. And specific conditions in these pockets might have helped animals grow bigger. So we're talking about giant sea snakes, catfish, and fish that no longer exist today. One had incredibly strong jaws, and the animal used them to eat hard things and even crush shells. Their teeth showed they were fierce predators other animals had every reason to be afraid of. They went through some changes when it came to diet, similar to some types of piranhas. And the competition to get to the top of the food chain wasn't a joke. Not when there were also such large predators as sharks, crocodiles, and ancient relatives of elephants. Sahara went through different phases. If you could use a time machine and take a peek at Earth's largest hot desert as it was about 6,000 years ago, you wouldn't have to struggle with sand and heat. You'd have a nice walk through a green and pretty lush place. In the past, people who lived in that area didn't leave drawings on cave walls that showed camels, sand dunes, and scorpions. All those things you'd see in today's Sahara. Instead, they drew crocodiles. That's additional evidence that the Sahara used to have a lot of water and plants enough to support these big yet scary animals. Around 3 billion years ago, Earth might have been mostly covered with water. Today, it's about 71% of its surface, but it seems that our planet used to be a giant ocean world with no continents at all, just some scattered islands. Scientists studied special rocks in Western Australia that formed in a place deep under the ocean called a hydrothermal vent system. To explain this better, it's important to mention two common oxygen types, O16 and O18. O18 is heavier because it has extra neutrons. O16 evaporates from water more easily, and as researchers studied an old ocean floor, they found a lot of O18, more than in today's oceans. This way, they realized ancient Earth had less dry land than Earth today. Australia is a good spot to conduct these studies because a long time ago, it also used to be a beautiful place with large animals and lush rainforests. But as time went by, the land became drier and Australia had more deserts formed, such as the Great Victoria Desert. Rainforest remained only on the edges of the continent. What happens with deserts across the globe is called desertification. That's when land that used to be good for growing things turns into a desert or something similar. Our planet changes over time, together with its climate. But desertification also happens because of human activities, like mining, farming, and building cities. And when land turns into a desert, it's a problem because it can't support people and animals anymore. Food doesn't grow there. There's not enough clean water, and animals lose their homes. To help with this problem, there's a plan many countries agreed to. They decided to work with farmers to take care of the land, fix damaged areas, and manage water better. All in all, to make our planet a better place for life.
Hey, future explorers. Let me tell you, some stuff might still be hanging around even 2,000 years later. Finland has an underground nuclear storage facility designed to last 100,000 years. Picture a massive underground tunnel system carved right out of solid rock. They wanted a solution that wouldn't burden future generations with constant babysitting in the area. This impressive place sits about 185 miles northwest of Helsinki. The engineers started planning it way back in the 1970s. They wanted to close up shop and decommission it in the 2000s. The heart of the crib is a spiraling track that's going to stretch 3 miles, diving down. To ensure maximum safety, they've got a bunch of multiple barriers in place. Steel and concrete structures are supposed to do the job. The waste fuel rods will be snuggled inside copper canisters with thick walls. These canisters will sit on a cozy bed of bentonite clay, which swells up when it gets wet. This way, it acts as a buffer against any geological shenanigans and prevents any pooling of liquid, which could corrode the copper. It's an incredible feat of engineering, and it's almost like creating a time capsule that will withstand the test of time. Kudos to the folks working on this, even though they won't be around to celebrate when it's done. Maybe in the future, they will find a way to make it last for hundreds of years more. I mean, they started planning it in the 1970s, but in the future, it would be a totally different game. Let's move on to Italy. When you stroll into the Pantheon in Rome, it puts on a show just like it did almost 2,000 years ago. Now, let's rewind a bit. This structure went through some tough times. The first Pantheon caught fire and burned down not once, but twice. Some fellas even said it was cursed. The completed Pantheon was a grand masterpiece with Greek-inspired touches, like those fancy columns. But the real jaw-dropper was its gigantic dome. The largest unsupported concrete dome on the planet. Now, the Pantheon's original purpose remains a mystery. Some say it was a Roman worshipping spot, while others think it was where the emperor got his hotline to the deities. The massive eye on top, known as the oculus, lets in sunbeams and rain. Marble from all over the Mediterranean made it look snazzy, but the Roman concrete made the magic happen. Then we've got the impressive Hoover Dam in the USA, an architectural masterpiece. Experts designed it to harness hydroelectricity and prevent water from going where it shouldn't. This dam is built like a fortress. Steel, concrete, and a lot of TLC keep it strong. Let's jet off to New Delhi and check out the Akshardham Temple, even though it's very young compared to the other structures I've mentioned. It was completed in 2005. It already has the characteristics of a building that can stand for a long time. During the construction, numerous ancient and modern innovations were used to ensure its endurability. Next on our list of the world's most future-proof buildings is the St. Louis Arch, which rises high over Missouri. Also known as the Gateway Arch, it is the tallest human-made monument in the USA. The Great Wall of China. While it's not a single building, the Great Wall of China is an ancient marvel that has survived for centuries. Some sections of the wall were reconstructed in modern times, but they still carry historical and cultural significance. Those bricks might look a little crumbly, but hey, they're still standing strong. Then we have the former Byzantine church, now known as Hagia Sophia from Istanbul. It still looks glorious, and it's 1,500 years old. It's been through many things, like earthquakes. Architects designed Hagia Sophia in an impressively short period. After the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453, Mehmed II converted it into a mosque. He added some new stuff, like a minaret and a chandelier. Hagia Sophia is a unique architectural marvel. Its main dome is 105 feet tall and flanked by two semi-domes on both sides. In terms of its floor plan, the building is nearly square, but from the interior perspective, it appears rectangular because of the extension of the roof by large semi-domes. The interior has 3 aisles separated by columns, with galleries above and substantial marble piers rising at both ends to support the dome. These columns are constructed of the finest marble, carefully chosen for their color and variety, while the lower walls are adorned with marble slabs. On the outside, there are windows above the galleries and around the base of the dome. When the sun's shining, it kinda tricks your eyes into thinking the dome is floating, because these windows hide the support structures. We couldn't have put together a list of the world's sturdiest buildings without mentioning perhaps the most famously enduring of them all: the Pyramids of Giza. They were completed around 2540 BCE. They've got the whole package: superior materials, genius engineering, and a design that puts all other structures to shame. The ancient Egyptians were all about building for eternity. They believed that the afterlife would last forever, so they made sure their tombs would too. The Egyptians threw in extra walls and other stuff just to be safe, even if they didn't fully understand the laws of physics. Now, let's shift our gaze to our time. Can today's skyscrapers beat the pyramids in the longevity game? The Burj Khalifa in Dubai is the world's tallest building. It boasts impressive engineering and architecture. Its reinforced concrete and steel structure, along with its iconic design, might help it withstand the test of time. Sure, skyscrapers are super tall and fancy, but they're not as sturdy as the pyramids. Modern skyscrapers need to deal with crazy winds, lightning strikes, and earthquakes too. Experts haven't agreed on this yet. Some say that if we take good care of them, they can last. But others think they'll eventually be torn down or abandoned. The verdict? Only time will tell. Alexander Rose and his team are up to something jaw-dropping. They're creating a 10,000-year clock in the Texan desert. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's take a trip to Japan. There, they have this fantastic tradition of rebuilding the Jingu Shrine with wood and thatch every 20 years for more than 13 centuries. It's to preserve the structures and pass on the craftsmanship to the next generation. But let's not stop there. Ancient artifacts and buildings from various cultures have survived the test of time, and each one has something to teach us. The clock project takes inspiration from these long-lasting wonders and aims to encourage us to think about our long-term future. Building a clock to last 10,000 years is no easy feat. The team must consider materials, location, and past examples of long-lasting structures. For instance, some of history's unique treasures survived simply because they were lost and found later. Going underground is another way to protect artifacts. Subterranean environments shield items from the elements and keep temperatures stable. But there's one pesky problem: water. It's always trying to sneak its way in. Materials matter big time when it comes to longevity. You see, everything ages because of oxidation, which means rusting. So, finding materials that can withstand thousands of years is vital. How long buildings can really last depends on the building's personality and purpose. Take those fancy office buildings, for instance. They're all about short-term commitment, designed to last only 30 to 50 years. Just like with any relationship, it takes effort to make something last longer. Regular checkups, maintenance, and repairs are the key to keeping the spark alive. Let's embark on a wild thought experiment. What if we could magically travel to all our ancestors in chronological order? Could we talk to them and actually form some connection? And just how far back can we go while still connecting with them? Well, let's see. Primates were the funky cousins of other mammals. Around 85 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous period, they went their own way and became the first of their kind. Human evolution is very complicated, and we can't draw a distinctive line on where it started. But we're going to start with hominins. Hominins are a group of primates that include all the species leading up to Homo sapiens. So, imagine you hopped in your super cool time machine and landed in the past, way back when hominins were chilling around. What would happen? First off, you'd spot these quirky creatures roaming around with their short, hairy bodies, curious faces, and big eyes. They might look a bit different from you, but that's part of the fun. They were excellent climbers and incredibly curious about the outer world. They munched on fruits, nuts, and whatever they found in nature. And yes, surprisingly, humans aren't meat eaters by nature. Originally, we all were vegans. Of course, with them, you can forget about proper communication. But still, primates are incredibly smart. So, a good old game of charades could do the trick. Mime your way into their hearts with friendly gestures, and they'll be thrilled to see a futuristic traveler like you. These hominins were curious beings, so they'd probably be very interested in you if you were friendly with them and gave them some food. Next, let's move on to Homo habilis and Homo erectus. Their period, the Stone Age, started about 2.6 million years ago. As you can guess, it was the time when we started using stone tools. The Stone Age lasted for roughly 3.4 million years and ended between 4000 BCE and 2000 BCE. It ended with the beginning of metalworking. Homo habilis, or handyman, was like the MacGyvers of the Stone Age. These crafty creatures were the first to use stone tools. And Homo erectus was the upright man. They were a bit more recent. As their name suggests, they were the first to walk on two legs like us. They might have looked a bit different from modern humans, but still. So what were their lives like? Well, they still were true survivors. Homo erectus loved to explore and tinker with things. They made simple stone tools, like sharp rocks for cutting and scraping. They were basically the early inventors. Homo erectus was quite adventurous. They left Africa and traveled to far-off lands, exploring new territories. They were the first ones to set foot in places like Asia and Europe. They lived in caves or simple shelters made of sticks and animal hides. And let's not forget their wild fashion sense. Animal skins and leaves were their trendy outfits. But don't think they just sat around all day. They were hunters and gatherers, seeking out delicious fruits, nuts, and even hunting animals. How would you communicate with them? Well, they used simple grunts, gestures, and body language to understand each other. So, if you met Homo habilis and Homo erectus, you'd be in for a wild ride. You could show them some advanced technology to impress them and teach them some new cool tricks. Next on our list are Homo heidelbergensis and Neanderthals. Homo heidelbergensis was like the cool older cousin of Neanderthals and us. They lived around 800,000 to 200,000 years ago. Picture them as sturdy and strong, with big brains compared to their earlier relatives. They were expert tool makers and loved exploring new places. The Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia from 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. Neanderthals were super smart, and they had awesome adaptations to cold weather. With their thick, strong bodies and big noses, they could handle chilly winters like champs. Both Homo heidelbergensis and Neanderthals were skilled hunters and gatherers. They'd chase after mammoths and other big game with sharp spears they crafted themselves. But it wasn't all rough and tough. They knew how to have fun too. Neanderthals made art and showed their emotions and connections with each other. With these folks, you could draw pictures in the dirt, dance around, and make gestures. They'd get the idea. And finally, we meet Homo sapiens. Picture this. You're waking up in a cave with your family, trying to keep warm by a flickering fire. The cave is pretty cozy, isn't it? But nope, no permanent homes here. You're part of a nomadic tribe, moving wherever the food is best. Hey, but at least you've got some nifty tools to survive. Grab your awesome handmade spear, crafted by watching others or maybe invented by your genius self. Time to go hunting mammoths. And if mammoths aren't cooperating, just gather nuts, berries, and bird eggs. Stone Age humans were real foodies. They made flour from oats and spiced things up with wild onions and mustard seeds. There were artists too. Using minerals and bones, they created stunning images and even flutes for some musical entertainment around the campfire. You still can only talk in body language and facial expressions. But Homo sapiens were smarter than their ancestors. So you could even teach them basic gestures and their meaning, like hands up for mammoth and stuff. Maybe try doing a funky dance or a happy jig. That would get their attention for sure. But this wouldn't be the only way to communicate. Stone Age peeps loved drawing and making flutes, so you could totally join in on the creative fun. Show off your artistic skills with a drawing or two, or maybe even play some tunes. Don't worry, they would be impressed by your skills, even if you aren't that far away from them. But tools are definitely the way to their hearts. If you brought some handy gadgets or cool inventions from our time, they'd be super impressed. Just create some simple tool from the future that can make their lives easier, and they'll love you instantly. So, while you might not be having deep philosophical debates with the Stone Age crew, you can still share some good times. Learning is the way to go. Besides, even though life was shorter back then, averaging around 30 years, it's still enough time to find a partner and have kids. Though, the dating pool might be a bit limited. So let's leave that topic for another time. Just hold on to that axe at night because, well, sometimes our ancestors would eat each other and like to do some head-dumping battles. Yikes. Let's finish our journey with the Bronze Age, just for fun. This cool era lasted from around 3300 to around 1200 BCE. And guess what? They were all about that strong metal called bronze. It's the time when people got creative and started using bronze to make all sorts of cool things. Bronze is a combo of copper and tin, making it harder and more durable than anything else at the time. Awesome civilizations started popping up all over the place. They either made their own bronze by smelting copper and mixing it with tin, or traded for it with other places. So, as you step into this ancient era, you'll be amazed by the sight of bustling Bronze Age cities with majestic bronze gates, amazing markets, and grand temples dedicated to powerful gods. During the Bronze Age, we finally developed languages and writing. Mesopotamia and Egypt were leading the way with their fancy cuneiform and hieroglyphs, the earliest writing systems ever. They were basically the kings of calligraphy. Remember, the language might be a bit different. You'd be hearing unfamiliar words. But with these humans, you can at least use drawings, art, and many other things to communicate. Anyway, this is what meeting our ancestors would be like. What a wild journey through time. So, remember to cherish our past and appreciate the wonders of our modern world. Stay tuned. It may seem that today, with our quite advanced technological development, science can explain pretty much any natural phenomenon. But that's not always true. Some things still stump experts and make them build exotic theories. Let's have a look at some of such phenomena. Hessdalen lights are a puzzling phenomenon you can observe in Hessdalen Valley in central Norway. The thing is that some highly unusual lights can often be seen over the valley. They appear mostly at night. The lights are typically white, but they occasionally turn yellowish or reddish. Nobody knows what makes them change color. What's more, the lights can move. And if at one moment they seem to motionlessly hang in midair, the next minute they may travel somewhere at lightning speed. There's no certain place where they appear, and you can't predict the duration of their stay. Despite all the research that has been done since the 1980s, scientists are still unable to explain this phenomenon as well as such weird behavior of lights. The sardine run lasts from May to July. During this time, millions of sardines swim northward along South Africa's east coast. You can probably imagine a feeding frenzy that starts at that time. It's believed that the water temperature must get lower than 70 degrees Fahrenheit for the migration to begin. This mushroom with a difficult name, Corioactis gister, is only found in Japan and Texas, and it makes scientists extremely confused. Why these two locations? It's true that they're on the same latitude, but these places are definitely not the only ones. Plus, they're so far away from each other. After studying the mushroom's DNA in 2004, experts suggested that the two populations might have been separated into two lineages around 19 million years ago. On Central Flores Island, there's a 3,000-foot-high volcano called Kelimutu. At its base, there is a small town. If you want to see the main attraction of the area, you'll most definitely stay there. And the attraction I'm talking about is 3 lakes, known as the Lake of Old People, the Lake of Young Men and Maidens, and the Enchanted Lake. Why are these lakes so popular and attract so many people? They inexplicably change colors. Ancient legends claim that the lakes are the final resting place of human souls, and those souls stay in different lakes according to their actions. As for scientific research, no one has yet conducted any to discover the cause of the changing colors. But theorists suppose that it might be due to underwater volcanic activity. It might be pushing minerals to the lake's surface. Then, depending on what elements those are, the lakes can turn blood red, bright turquoise, or olive green. But the coolest thing? The lakes are never all the same color at the same time. This phenomenon is unique and hasn't been observed anywhere else in the world. Those who have ever heard an annoying noise a kettle makes to inform you the water inside is boiling can imagine what the whistle sounds like. Even though this noise isn't as blood-curdling as some other unexplained sounds, it doesn't make the whistle any less mysterious. It's incredibly elusive. In 1997, only one underwater microphone was able to pick it up. At that time, researchers didn't manage to pinpoint the source of the noise. The most likely cause of the unusual sound is an eruption of one of the submarine volcanoes. But once again, there's not enough proof to make sure. There's probably no person on Earth who doesn't marvel at the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. But not everyone knows that there is another triangle. Not so famous, but just as dangerous. Dragon's Triangle, or the Devil's Sea, lies in the area between Japan and the islands of Voynich. It covers a big part of the Philippine Sea as well. That's why people also call this place the Pacific Bermuda Triangle. Surprisingly, or not really, the Devil's Sea is situated exactly opposite the Bermuda Triangle. Ships and planes tend to disappear here with the same regularity as in the North Atlantic Triangle. People also report seeing ghost ships in the open sea. And while scientists provide logical reasons for the vanishing vessels and aircraft, most people still believe in the paranormal nature of Dragon's Triangle. For the first time, a bizarre sound later called the upsweep was registered in 1991 in the Pacific Ocean. One of the most unusual things about the sound is that it's constantly changing. It varies from high to low frequencies and then back again. You can hear it better in the spring and fall than in the winter and summer. The sound travels from the bottom of the ocean toward its surface. Scientists do have a theory explaining this phenomenon. They think it might be the activity of undersea volcanoes that causes the sound. Hot lava that's pouring into the ice-cold ocean water can theoretically produce such noise. But researchers haven't found any evidence to confirm this theory yet. On the thin Curonian spit splitting the Baltic Sea from the Curonian Lagoon, there is one of the most bizarre places on Earth. Locals call this area the Dancing Forest because pine trees in this forest have shockingly unusual shapes. They twist in spirals and circles along the ground. There are some theories why it could be happening, of course. Some people claim that huge amounts of positive and negative energies once clashed in that spot. More down-to-earth individuals believe that the reason is geological. Sandy soil in the area is too unstable to hold trees growing upright. The most popular is the idea that strong winds blowing from the water influence the shape of the trees. In any case, experts haven't come to the final conclusion yet. Potomsky Crater is described as a mount with a perfect shape. Its size is more than that of a 25-story building. It sits in the middle of the woods with its top chopped off and presents quite a sight. In fact, the shape of the crater is pretty unusual. It has a rounded inner dome that is about 40 feet high. At first sight, this formation looks like a volcano, but after a closer examination, you might realize that it's not the case. The dome in the center of the cone is extremely unusual for a volcano. In addition, there haven't been any volcanoes in this region for millions of years, while the age of the crater is estimated to be about 250 years. The weird shape that the crater has is like nothing scientists have ever seen. This, as well as the fact that any theory fails to explain the origin of the formation, adds to the mystery around it. And that's not the most terrifying thing. After researchers analyzed the growth rings of the trees near the crater, they found out that the trees experienced a period of strangely accelerated growth that lasted for 40 years. After that, they began to grow as they were supposed to. The level of radiation near the crater is also higher than in the nearby areas. No one has an explanation for this fact. On top of that, nothing grows on the blood-chilling formation. Perhaps because the crater also has a lovely habit of constant shifting. It rises and falls, influenced by some inexplicable force. Locals believe in the evil that dwells in that place. While exploring the Amazon rainforest, researchers discovered gigantic geoglyphs. their geometrical drawings carved into the ground. The trenches were as large as 36 feet wide and 13 feet deep. They were created at different times, most between the 1st to the 15th century. There are more than 450 geoglyphs in the north of Bolivia and Brazil. The most ancient of them could have been created around 3,000 years ago. The huge earthworks were likely used for common meetings and discussions, but scientists haven't found enough proof yet.
If there's a question that still baffles archaeologists to this day, it's this one. How did the ancient Egyptians build those magnificent pyramids? As far as we know today, their resources were quite limited, especially in terms of tools and building materials. We still don't have a fully satisfying answer, but hey, we've got some pretty amazing theories worth considering. The leading contender among these theories involves the clever Egyptians employing a sneaky strategy. Now picture this. They constructed a slanted and curving mound made of bricks, earth, and sand encircling the pyramid to be. As the pyramid grew taller and taller, they simply increased the height and length of this wacky structure. It's like they were playing an ancient game of Jenga. Now, how did they get those massive stone blocks up there? Well, according to the legendary ancient Greek historian Herodotus, they used sleds, rollers, and levers. It sounds like they turned construction into a supersized game of tug-of-war. And guess what? Herodotus also claimed that the Great Pyramid, the one from Giza, the granddaddy of them all, took a whopping 20 years to build. There's more. Herodotus also dropped a mind-boggling number on us. 100,000 men were supposedly involved in this pyramid extravaganza. Did they hire the entire Egyptian population? Well, it might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. These men were probably mostly farmers, so they probably focused on the pyramids when there wasn't much work to be done in the fields. Like during the flood season of the Nile River. Obviously, specialists in the archaeological community had something to add to this theory. By the late 20th century, they discovered some evidence that suggests the workforce might have been smaller and more permanent than previously thought. Instead of a massive army of 100,000 pyramid builders, they proposed that a modest crew of around 20,000 workers, accompanied by support personnel like bakers, physicians, and even spiritual leaders, could have gotten the job done. There was also this theory that claimed that the pyramids were actually built from the top downward. It suggested that these colossal structures were nothing more than isolated hills used as quarries. The stones were supposedly drawn from these hills, and over time, competing engineers took charge and transformed them into the iconic pyramids we know today. Now, before you dismiss this theory as a wild fantasy, some folks thought it wasn't completely crazy. After all, there are instances where isolated hills exist, so maybe this theory had a tiny glimmer of truth. Whether it involved ramp building or ingenious work schedules, one thing is clear. Those pyramids have definitely left their mark on history and on our imaginations. Now, speaking of ancient Egyptian mysteries, there's this gigantic unfinished obelisk sitting in ancient Egypt, and scientists are trying to figure out how it was shaped. Now, some people suggest that our industrious ancestors used handheld pounders to get the job done. One expert has a different take on the matter, though. He argues that if we take a closer look at the pattern left behind by the shaping tool, we'll notice something peculiar. The walls of the trenches surrounding the obelisk display a neat and even pattern, which is pretty unlikely if they were pounded away by mere mortal hands. According to this expert, those horizontal striations are usually the result of a tool that takes breaks while removing material, leaving its mark on the surface. But wait, there's more. Imagine the tool being rocked back and forth against the trench walls, clearing away the waste to keep the trench from narrowing. Well, in that case, the tool might have left some funky horizontal striations where it was pressed against the sidewall. This sounds like some fancy technology at play, don't you think? And guess what? The dynastic Egyptians probably didn't have access to that kind of know-how. Another famous Egyptologist from way back also uncovered a bunch of core drills during his adventures. Although the actual drill bits are missing, his collection houses these particular core remnants made of limestone, alabaster, and even granite. These constructions aren't the only amazing thing the ancient Egyptians left behind, though. As it turns out, the Egyptians were the genius minds behind the creation of the handheld mirror. Yeah, that little mirror you use every day to check yourself out. But here's the twist. These mirrors are like pieces of art. They were decorated with inscriptions and figures. But that's not all. The Egyptians had a serious concern with their appearance. They knew the importance of personal hygiene and looking fabulous. So, in their quest for pearly whites, they invented toothbrushes and toothpaste. Dental problems were pretty common back then, and their smiles weren't exactly all white. Dentistry wasn't their strongest suit, you see. Maybe their minds were distracted by all that pyramid building. So that doesn't mean those ancient toothpaste recipes weren't amazing. One delightful concoction included rock salt, mint, dried iris petals, and pepper. Some brave dentists in the 21st century tried it out, and it worked pretty well. Ground-up ash was also used in another recipe to create a tooth cleansing paste. Mint was missing, so that didn't do much for their breath. That's when the genius Egyptians came up with the world's first breath mints. They made tablets from heated spices like cinnamon, and they mixed it with honey. Now, let's shift gears to home decor, Egyptian style. They surely took ornamentation to the next level. While the concept of decorating furniture started in Mesopotamia, the Egyptians cranked it up a notch. They went all out with different colors of ink and even developed various weights of paper. Oh, and let's not forget about those cute little area rugs we all have in our homes today. Guess who came up with the idea? Yep, the Egyptians. They used the versatile papyrus plant to make those cozy rugs. And speaking of trends, the Egyptians loved their knickknacks. They had an assortment of small figurines in the shapes of cats, dogs, and people. These statues were made from various materials, like simple sun-dried mud to the ultimate bling of gold. It all depended on how loaded you were. The Egyptians were also all about farming, and they knew that clean water was crucial for their crops and animals. That's why they came up with some nifty inventions and techniques to make sure their land was fertile and their plants were happy. First off, they had the genius idea of using ox-drawn plows. They had two types of plows, heavy and light. The heavy plow would strut its stuff, cutting deep furrows in the soil, while the lighter plow followed behind, fluffing up the earth. But they didn't stop there. After plowing, the Egyptians would break up clumps of soil and sow the rows with seeds. To give those seeds a good old squish into the furrows, they'd march their livestock across the field, effectively closing up the furrows. But hey, all that hard work would be pointless if their seeds were as dry as the Sahara. That's where irrigation comes into play. The Egyptians were so good at it that other cultures, like the Greeks and Romans, couldn't help but copy their techniques. Now let's switch gears and talk about the marvelous architecture of ancient Egypt. These folks weren't just skilled farmers, they were also architectural maestros. They built these fancy canals to carry water to farms and villages, and boy, did they know how to make those canals look pretty. Just imagine strolling along a canal lined with ornate structures. The pharaoh Ramesses the Great was quite the overachiever when it came to construction. One of his mind-blowing creations was the construction located at Abu Simbel. This building was designed so that twice a year, the sun would shine directly into it and illuminate the statues of Ramesses. And let's not forget about the corbelled arch. Without this architectural gem, we'd be missing out on some mind-boggling structures like the Great Pyramid. The Egyptians knew how to make things stand tall and proud, thanks to their engineering and construction wizardry. They built grand halls and inner sanctums that make your jaw drop. And some of these temples doubled as astronomical observatories.
Have you heard of Gockley Tepe? It's an ancient site in Turkey that literally made historians rewrite history books. Over 11,000 years ago, a group of prehistoric humans crafted an enigmatic masterpiece that's even older than Stonehenge. Before its discovery, archaeologists believed that people didn't know about iron and weren't good at making pottery. They were sure that settled life only emerged with the need for agriculture. but Gobekli Tepe changed this belief. The place has revealed that it was the temple that paved the way for a settled life, not agriculture. Until this discovery, researchers believed that farming was the catalyst for sedentary living. Meet Professor Schmidt, the guy whose findings changed this theory. He managed to prove that hunter-gatherer communities laid the very foundations of this way of life. Back in the 1960s, other archaeologists visited the area, but they totally missed the mark. While surveying the region, they stumbled upon a hill with scattered limestone slabs and concluded it was just an old burial ground from medieval times. Little did they know that there was so much more to uncover. In 1994, Schmidt embarked on his own survey of prehistoric sites in the area. Surprise! He instantly realized he had discovered something truly extraordinary. Unlike the nearby flat and barren plateaus, Gobekli Tepe had a gently rounded top, rising 50 feet above the surrounding landscape. Funny enough, the translation of this place's name is Potbelly Hill. Schmidt was sure only humans could have made something like this. Those broken limestone pieces that were mistaken for gravestones turned out to be way more exciting. It was like stumbling upon a hidden treasure. The pieces took on a whole new meaning, and Schmidt with his team was about to dive into the secrets waiting beneath the surface. To their surprise, they found no traces of a settlement, no hearths for cooking, no houses, and none of those adorable clay figurines commonly found in nearby sites of similar age. However, they uncovered that those ancient people used tools like stone hammers. So, Schmidt and his team put their heads together and took a wild guess at the age of Gobekli Tepe's stone structures. Their estimation got backed up by some limited carbon dating done right at the site. The ancient vibes of this place were finally starting to make sense. It was like a puzzle slowly coming together. You may think that back then, people didn't have special tools to create something as cool as Gobekli Tepe. Not true. Turns out, these prehistoric folks used flint tools instead of fancy metal chisels. They were also skilled at chipping away softer limestone and crafting pillars right on the spot. Afterward, they carried the pillars a short distance to the summit and placed them upright. Once the stone rings were complete, they covered them with layers of dirt. Over time, they added new rings, and voila! You've got a cool hill to impress people in the future. During their first year of excavation, the team went through 15,000 pieces of animal bones from wild creatures. These people didn't have pet animals or grow their own food. They hunted wild animals for their meals. But things were about to change, because the place had everything they needed to start farming. Scientists say they had wild sheep and wild grains that could be domesticated. And guess what? Just 20 miles away, geneticists found evidence of the world's oldest domesticated strains of wheat at a prehistoric village. These amazing findings have completely changed how we view civilization. In the past, experts believed that people needed to learn how to farm and settle in one place before they could build temples and develop complex societies. But guess what? Schmidt's research flips that idea on its head. He claims that the incredible effort put into constructing these astonishing structures actually set the stage for the development of advanced societies. It means that societal and cultural changes happened before agriculture. Schmidt has this fascinating hypothesis about Gobekli Tepe. He thinks it could have been a special burial site where people left their loved ones. And here's the twist. The burial site was adorned with fancy statues and symbols representing deities from the spiritual realm. The idea that Gobekli Tepe could have served as a sacred place adds another layer of complexity to the whole story. While the site's true purpose may remain elusive, Schmidt's insights invite us to consider the profound interplay between life and the afterlife, and the deep reverence ancient hunter-gatherer societies may have had for their departed ancestors. Now let's talk about the stars of the show, the mesmerizing T-shaped columns that dominate Gockley Tepe. These mysterious structures range from 10 to 20 feet tall and most likely represent stylized human figures. But one figure stands out from the rest, the three-dimensional lion relief. This depiction really fires up our imagination. Why? Because it hints at the possibility that lions roamed Anatolia during the Neolithic period. These standing stones are arranged in circles and placed in rectangular pits. Each circle has a similar setup. Two big T-shaped pillars in the center, surrounded by slightly smaller ones facing inward. Talk about a stylish arrangement. These towering pillars reach a whopping 16 feet and weigh between 7 and 10 tons. Some pillars are plain and simple, while others are like works of art with intricate carvings. Foxes, scorpions, and vultures come to life, crawling and twisting on the pillars' sides. But it's not just animals depicted on these stones. Some pillars have abstract shapes representing humans, and even small carvings of clothing items. Some of them even have belts. Now, there's one pillar that stands out from the rest like a rock star. This super old stone pillar suggests that a comet crashed into Earth. It happened during a chilly period that lasted about 1,000 years. Previous studies examining Greenland ice cores hinted at this comet theory, but now the carvings at Gockley Tepe prove it right. The carvings on the pillars are like a historical comic strip. They even show a headless human figure. Researchers fed the images into a computer and discovered their connections to constellations, indicating that this temple might have been an ancient observatory. It's like our ancestors were trying to document this cataclysmic event in their own unique way. Archaeologists have been excavating and researching Gockley Tepe since the mid-1990s, peeling back layers of history and providing us with a deeper understanding of the intricate relationship between various elements. They have no plans to stop the whole process for another 150 years. Who knows what else they'll find? You see, Gockley Tepe has been labeled purely as a ritual site with no signs of domestic activities. We were led to believe that the absence of water meant it couldn't support semi-sedentary communities. But scientists believe it's time to shake things up and approach Gockley Tepe with fresh eyes. It's time to question what we believed before and use new evidence and different ways of thinking. Like, there might have been a group of people living in the area who didn't stay in one place all the time. They moved around a bit but still had their own civilization, living in the area semi-sedentarily. Gockley Tepe is not just home to a single temple, but an astounding collection of over 20 ancient structures. As archaeologists delve into the depths of this wonder, they are unraveling its unique layout, featuring two prominent focal points at the heart of each establishment, complemented by smaller structures and dividing walls. What's even crazier is that in this area, there are over 200 obelisks, which are narrow tapering monuments.
So think about it. What was the weirdest thing you've ever done for work? Printing hundreds of pages of useless reports or unknotting holiday lights? Well, there's a scientist out there who spent 100 days below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. Dr. Joseph Dieterich, or rather Dr. Deep Sea as he likes to call himself, was living underwater as part of Project Neptune 100. This project is a long-term study of how compression affects humans, both physiologically and psychologically. Dr. Deep Sea, who's a biomedical engineer and University of South Florida associate professor, went under the sea to see if increased pressure can help humans live longer and prevent health problems that come with old age. From day one of the mission, Dr. Dieterich was actively sharing what was going on in his social networks. He mentioned that another important goal for him was to inspire scientists from different generations to study life undersea. After 74 days of the mission, he officially set a new Guinness World Record for the longest time living in an underwater fixed habitat. But he didn't just jump out on the surface after it, woohoo, and stayed the planned 100 days. The scientist definitely wasn't bored for those 14 weeks. He collected data, collaborated with other researchers, virtually taught a biomedical engineering course at his university, and reached out to thousands of students from 15 countries online. Once the mission was over, Dr. Tut was greeted by his family and friends, the media, and many fans who were following his work online. Dr. Deep Sea is now 55 years old, and he claims that living underwater has really made him feel 10 years younger. The doctors who greeted him and the results of the tests they have so far prove the de-aging effect. Our hero has some improvement in his sleep and metabolism. He also noted that his body had shrunk a half an inch. Wow, 2,300 more days and he'd be a foot shorter. Maybe. Probably not. If you want to try a light version of what Dr. Deep Sea has gone through, you have two options. The first option is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. You go inside a special chamber where the air pressure is higher than normal. It helps more oxygen get inside your lungs. It has a healing effect on your body. Too much oxygen can be a bad thing, though, so these chambers must follow strict regulations. You can also stay in the exact same place where Dr. Tut lived. It's called Jules Undersea Lodge, after Jules Verne, the author of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's a two-bedroom apartment located 30 feet below the surface of a lagoon in Key Largo, Florida. Don't worry, your prospective home won't sail away. It's attached to the seabed by leg structures. There are 3 windows with a direct ocean view and some marine life outside. A lot of it. There's also a command center that keeps oxygen, water, and power levels under control. An air conditioner keeps the temperature comfortable, and a chef dives in to cook meals for the guests upon request. Now, you can't just dive in to see if they have a spare room, though. There's some paperwork involved for each guest. And you'll have to put on some gear and leave it in the wet room before you get into the nice and comfortable apartment. As for Dr. Tut, he doesn't plan to stop his studies of how humans can survive in isolated environments. He's going to take a flight on a modified airliner where you can experience zero gravity multiple times. Something not for the weak of stomach. It's the next step to his dream of becoming a civilian astronaut and traveling into space by 2026. Dr. Deep Sea wasn't the first scientist to stay alone in an unusual setting for research purposes. Italian sociologist Maurizio Montalbini had spent a total of 2 years and 8 months in caves to see how the human mind and body would cope with complete isolation. He started his experiments in the 1980s. At the end of 1986, he entered a cave in the Apennine Mountains near Ancona in Italy. He would only get back on the surface 210 days later, which made him the world record breaker for spending the longest in complete isolation at that time. Montalbini survived on a high-calorie diet of powdered foods and pills, much like those that astronauts use on space flights. Scientists monitored his health using special tools from the outside of the cave. Maurizio would later break his own record, and he shared that the only way to do it was to make a friend of solitude instead of fighting it. He did his experiments in collaboration with NASA and universities around the world and proved that isolation affects time perception and sleep. An interior designer from Ancona was so inspired by the experiments that she volunteered to take part in a similar one herself in 1989. Stefania Follini spent 4 months in an underground room 30 feet down in the Lost Cave in New Mexico. The experiment was on circadian rhythms, those 24-hour cycles that are part of your body's internal clock. Stefania had no natural clues on what time or day it was. Soon enough, she stayed awake for more than 20 hours and slept for 10 hours at a time. So her biological clock changed into a 48-hour day cycle. She stayed entertained down there thanks to a guitar, a computer, 2 friendly mice, some frogs, and some grasshoppers. She decorated the cave with cutouts from cardboard when she got bored and did judo to stay strong and flexible. Once the experiment was over, the scientists who greeted Stefania asked her to guess what day it was. She felt like it was the middle of March, but in reality, she went out of the cave on May 22nd, so she lost the perception of time and 17 pounds. Her meals were super spread out because of her new regime, and because she mostly ate beans and rice, she had a shortage of vitamin D. You know that feeling when your parents tell you something all the time and you wish you could prove them wrong? Well, it drove Dr. Donald Unger into an unusual scientific experiment. He cracked the knuckles on his left hand twice a day for over 50 years. He didn't get any terrible health conditions, unlike what his mother told him. Of course, that evidence can't be enough to prove or disprove this common belief, but there are other studies that showed the same results. Regine Grease, a biologist from British Columbia, Canada, decided to ignore the wisdom we all know: sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite, and let bedbugs bite her, around 180,000 times, all for science. She did it to test and find the most effective compounds to attract and trap bedbugs. Once those little unwelcome guests get inside your building, making them leave can be tricky and cost a lot. The biologist, together with her team, decided to see if baiting traps with pheromones could help lure the bugs and detect their gatherings before they multiply. They were missing one puzzle piece: the compound that bedbugs use to determine that a particular habitat is a safe place for them to settle. And that's how Grease became bait for bedbugs. Her team managed to find that the compound they were looking for was histamine, which humans produce during immune responses. The researchers believe this means they can produce really cheap chemical traps for those little pests. Dr. Kevin Warwick, former professor of cybernetics at the University of Reading, became the world's first real cyborg. He connected his own nervous system to a computer to see how technology can change healthcare. He implanted a device in his left arm to transmit his own neural signals to a robotic hand and control it. The scientist believes implants are the ideal solution for people with neurological problems, as they can control objects just by thinking about moving. And it doesn't have to be only about treatment. This tech can help all humans open up a huge potential if we link up the human brain to a computer or AI system.
Did you used to make sandcastles at the beach when you were little? The structure had a moat, so you needed to dig deep. While holding a plastic shovel, you probably thought, how deep can I go? Well, this question motivated a group of scientists in the Far East. They have decided to dig the deepest hole in their home country, China. The drilling team's goal is to reach a depth of nearly 33,000 feet. That's about 1 1/10 times as deep as Mount Everest is tall. The location of the borehole is at the edge of the second largest shifting sand desert in the world, Taklamakan Desert. During a single day, air temperatures there can vary over 100 degrees. The drilling rig is impressive on its own. It weighs some 550 tons and is the height of a 20-story building. And it's pretty powerful, too. It can lift the equivalent of 120 adult elephants. These engineers aren't kidding. One of them compared the project to driving a big truck on 2 thin steel cables. That's why they expect the dig to last well over a year. Their ultimate goal is to drill downward through 10 layers of strata. These are horizontal layers of sedimentary rock. Sounds complicated? Just look at any exposed cliff and you'll notice how it has stripes of different colors. These are the strata I'm talking about. If we translate it from Latin to plain English, we'll get things that spread out. Makes sense. Each layer of rock represents a specific geological period. Remember Spielberg's 1993 blockbuster Jurassic Park? That's just one of these geological periods. It ended some 145 million years ago. But in Central Asia, scientists won't travel that far through time. They hope to reach the rock dating back to the Cretaceous. That's the geological period just after the Jurassic. It lasted until some 66 million years ago. This was the time when T-Rex still roamed North America. But why mount such a complicated operation in the first place? A single goal would be a waste of funds. That's why engineers in Central Asia have several objectives. They want to explore the planet's internal structure. This involves the search for natural resources, such as mineral deposits and oil. Another goal is to collect scientific data on earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The information will help researchers better predict these events in the future. So, hardcore science is behind this pioneering project, but it's not the first of its kind. Deep in the Arctic Circle lies the Kola Peninsula. And no, it doesn't have anything to do with the famous beverage company from Atlanta. This Kola is a region of great natural beauty, covered in forests and lakes, and an abandoned scientific research station. Inside this crumbling building, a rusty metal cap sticks out from the concrete. It doesn't look that impressive today, but this is the site of the deepest man-made hole on the planet. It is over 40,000 feet deep. That's deeper than the Mariana Trench, 36,201 feet, the deepest place on Earth. Scientists were drilling it for nearly a quarter of a century. The project started in 1970 and finally shut down in 1995. But if you travel to this region close to Norway, you wouldn't be impressed by the shaft. It is only 9 inches in diameter. It would be impossible to fall down such a narrow opening. And despite the figures, the hole is pretty shallow on a bigger scale. You see, the drill bit went through only a third of the Earth's crust. Let me explain. Remember those layers of strata? Yup, that's what our planet looks like on the inside. The 3 layers are the crust, the mantle, and the core. The crust accounts for only 1% of Earth's mass, and it's some 25 miles thick. But it holds nearly all life in the known universe. The deeper you go, the hotter it gets. At the place where the crust meets the mantle, Moho, temperatures max out at 752 degrees Fahrenheit. Ouch. There are 2 types of Earth's outermost shell, oceanic and continental. The crust is thinner under the ocean floor, so why not drill here? Well, the thinnest part is usually the deepest part of the ocean. That doesn't mean that people haven't tried to drill into the seabed. Americans attempted this off the coast of Mexico in 1961, Project Mojole. Drilling underwater was more expensive than anyone anticipated. A few meters of basalt, the researchers were able to bring up costs some $40 million in today's money. Not worth the effort, literally. The Kola Superdeep borehole also burned money quickly. And that wasn't the only heat scientists had to face. The temperature at the top depth was a staggering 356 degrees Fahrenheit. That was double what the drilling team expected. Their machinery simply couldn't operate in that heat. At this depth, rocks behaved more like plastic than rock. If they had gone deeper, the stones would have the consistency of oversized caramels. But the drilling team gave their best. They even invented a new type of drill where only the tip rotated. There was also a lubricant to smoothen the process. This simply means they pumped a lot of pressured mud into the hole. Yet, they came short. Have scientists completely given up? Not by a long shot. The Japanese built a ship, Chikyu, 20 years ago to drill through the seabed, and they have invested a hefty sum in the project, $1 billion. The mission's goal was to drill into the Earth's crust where it's the thinnest. Under the ocean floor, it is less than 4 miles thick. If the Japanese team of scientists succeeds, it will be the first time humans recovered in situ mantle rocks. What is that? In situ is a Latin term that simply means in the original place. The only time we get to see what Earth's mantle looks like is during a volcanic eruption. A plume of hot mantle rising to the surface will form a volcano. You know the rest. But where are the Japanese researchers planning to drill? After all, they have a huge ship, so it could be anywhere in Earth's oceans. They've narrowed it down to 3 locations: Costa Rica, Hawaii, or Baja. In cartoons, characters often dig up a hole and end up in another country. The idea is that since our blue planet is round and you dig straight down, you'll end up on the other side of the world. Sounds interesting, but this theory has no grounding in truth, pun intended. Science knows more about outer space than about what's underneath our feet, and digging won't get us far. The temperature at our planet's inner core exceeds 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The best heat-resistant materials humankind has developed, tantalum carbide and hafnium carbide, can withstand around 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Good enough for building spacecraft, but not good enough for traveling to the center of our planet. But will Jules Verne's famous novel, Journey to the Center of the Earth, ever become a reality? For now, we can only imagine. The vessel that would take someone to the center of the Earth would first have to have great insulation. Then it would have to withstand a pressure 4,000 times stronger than at sea level. Let's talk about the finances. The cost of this imaginary mission would be astronomical. The good news is that you could pay it off with what you find underground. At a certain depth, 93 miles, you'll stumble upon diamonds. They form when all that heat and pressure alter the structure of carbon atoms. The final leg of the journey would take you through the Earth's core. The temperature here is the same as on the surface of the sun, and you'd be traveling through molten iron and nickel. But that's not the weirdest fact. The outer core has low gravity. The mass of our planet would be behind you. So the gravitational force would actually pull your vessel backward. Future travelers to the center of the Earth better have a supercharge button. That would be the only way to reach the planet's inner core.
Prepare for blast-off! because there's some exciting news from NASA coming our way. Care to look into the fascinating world of Saturn's moon, Titan? NASA's groundbreaking Dragonfly rotorcraft lander is set to take off in 2027, looking to explore this mysterious space object. Now let me introduce you to Titan. It's an icy celestial body with an atmosphere filled with nitrogen, and it might even have an underground ocean. Titan is also home to rivers and lakes that flow on its surface. But guess what? They're not filled with water like our lovely planet. They have methane instead. Now let's check out Titan's celestial credentials. It's not just any moon. It's the second largest in our entire solar system. It's only 2% smaller than the biggest moon we have hanging around our neighborhood, which is Jupiter's Ganymede. Titan's size even puts Mercury to shame. And did I mention that its atmosphere is 4 times denser than that of Earth's? Thanks to Titan's lower gravity and thick atmosphere, Dragonfly is the perfect robotic companion to uncover its hidden treasures. Let's move on to Dragonfly, the star of NASA's upcoming mission to Titan. This cosmic drone is not your average explorer. Equipped with a full array of interesting gadgets, Dragonfly is like a flying laboratory, ready to uncover more secrets of Titan. It's the first interplanetary rotorcraft lander probe, designed to take us on an epic journey of discovery. And don't let its name fool you. Dragonfly won't just buzz around aimlessly. This technological marvel is able to glide for several miles between different locations on Titan's surface. Think of it as a cosmic Uber service for scientists. And speaking of technology, Dragonfly is carrying some seriously cool equipment. It'll feature the Drill for Acquisition of Complex Organics, DRACO, instrument, which will help us scoop out material from Titan, while the Dragonfly Mass Spectrometer, DRAMS, will analyze what these samples are made of. But how did we stumble upon Titan? It was March 25th, 1655, when a Dutch astronomer was out there with his telescope, exploring the cosmos. Lo and behold, he spotted something amazing. It was Titan, the biggest moon of Saturn. Fast forward almost 300 years to 1944, when another cool astronomer jumped into the picture. He was doing some experiments with light when he figured out that Titan actually has its very own atmosphere. There's more to this story. In 1979, the Pioneer 11 spacecraft decided to take a joyride through the Saturn system. It confirmed all the cool things scientists had previously speculated about Titan, like its temperature and mass. However, there was one tiny mistake. Those sneaky scientists thought Titan might be the biggest moon in the entire solar system. Oops, wrong guess. Nevertheless, Titan had this mysterious, dense atmosphere that kept everyone on their toes. Now let's zoom in on the 1980s, when the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft make their grand entrance. These cosmic explorers flew past Saturn, and they wanted to get a good look at Titan's surface. That's when Titan decided to play a game of hide-and-seek with them. Its hazy atmosphere made it impossible to see what was going on down there. So all the Voyagers managed to capture were images of a lonely orange world. However, they did spot a fancy blue haze hanging out in the upper atmosphere. Things started to get really exciting in the 1990s. The Hubble Space Telescope joined the party and decided to take some cool snapshots of Titan using special infrared light. This clever device managed to pierce through the haze, and voila! The Hubble images revealed differently colored areas on Titan, almost like a giant cosmic chessboard. We now know that there's even a bright spot as wide as Australia down there. However, despite these fantastic pictures, the mystery of what lay beneath Titan's haze was still unsolved. It was 2004 when the stage was set for Cassini and its European sidekick, the Huygens probe. They were like the ultimate dynamic duo, ready to take on Saturn. Cassini started orbiting the ringed planet and immediately focused its attention on Titan. The big moment finally arrived. On January 14, 2005, the Huygens probe pierced through Titan's atmosphere. During its descent, Huygens collected all sorts of amazing data, snapping images and analyzing the atmosphere. The probe then transmitted this valuable information back to Cassini, which, like a cosmic courier, sent it to us eagerly waiting Earthlings. Over the next 13 years, Cassini flew close to Titan over 100 times, using all sorts of fancy instruments to get a good look at the moon's surface and atmosphere. Scientists could finally confirm that Titan had clouds, lakes, and rivers, and there was also some rain pouring down its surface. Thankfully for us, Titan isn't the only moon in our solar system that could technically harbor life. Take the wondrous moon of Neptune called Triton. For starters, it's the largest moon of Neptune, but it's also a real oddball. Among the many moons out there, only 5 are known to be geologically active. And guess what? Triton is proudly part of this exclusive club. It loves to show off its geysers, which spew nitrogen gas. Picture Triton as a fashionista in an icy ensemble. Its surface is mainly frozen nitrogen, giving it a chill, frosty vibe. You might want to bring a warm coat if you ever visit. Now, you may be wondering how Triton manages to keep warm in such a frigid environment. Well, it's got a secret weapon called tidal forces. Imagine Triton and Neptune engaged in a cosmic dance heat. You might be getting excited about the possibility of life on Triton. However, finding life on this moon is about as likely as finding a unicorn riding a skateboard. Voyager 2, the only mission to ever fly by Triton, made its journey back in 1989. And if you're hoping for another mission to Triton anytime soon, well, let's just say the stars aren't aligning in our favor. Literally. The window for a mission to Triton opens up only once every 13 years, because our planet and Jupiter need to be perfectly aligned for the landing to work. Scientists would use the gravitational pull of the largest planet in our solar system to safely deliver a probe on Triton. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the polar bear. It's so cold on Triton that hopes for life to survive unfrozen are about as slim as a toothpick. Sorry, potential little microbes. You might need a few extra sweaters to set up shop down there. Even though Triton may not be the most welcoming place for life, it's still a celestial gem worth exploring. Scientists also believe Triton wasn't always a part of Neptune's crew. As it turns out, Triton was most likely just minding its business, hanging around aimlessly in the distant Kuiper belt. Along came Neptune with its mighty gravitational pull and snatched Triton right out, officially making it a moon of its own. Just like our trusty satellite, Triton is also stuck in a permanent face-off with Neptune. One side of Triton always has its eyes locked on the planet. As for this amazing moon's fate, things aren't looking so good in the long run. It's already getting closer and closer to Neptune every day. Why is that, you might wonder? The problem is with those tidal interactions, which are playing some cosmic tricks on Triton. They're causing its orbit to wither away, like a slow-motion dance towards Neptune. Scientists predict that in about 3.6 billion years, Triton will cross an invisible boundary. If these current calculations are correct, there are 2 possible scenarios. It'll either have a collision with Neptune's atmosphere, or it might just break up into tiny pieces. If the latter happens, an all-new ring system would form around Neptune, just like the one we see around Saturn nowadays. Triton is not the only satellite that might end up this way. Phobos, one of the Martian moons, is likely to disintegrate too, and sooner, in 30 to 50 million years.
Picture this. You're planning your dream holiday, but instead of going to a tropical beach or a bustling city, you're thinking about going to space. Imagine yourself floating, weightless, looking down at Earth from a whole new perspective. The beauty and wonder of our planet become even more evident when you're viewing it from a distance. And now, this dream can come true. Yes, you heard that right. Space tourism. Space tourism is something that has fascinated people for generations. This idea has been around for almost 20 years.
We've seen it in movies and read about it in stories. But now, thanks to advancements in technology, it's finally becoming a reality. The first space tourist was a businessman named Dennis Tito. He visited the International Space Station in 2001. Sounds incredible, but here's the catch. Tito's trip cost a mind-boggling $20 million. That's a lot of money, and it made space travel seem like a dream that only the super rich could afford. And it's true that space tourism can be quite expensive. But a lot of time has passed since that day, and now space tourism is becoming more attainable for people who aren't billionaires. Of course, the industry is still in its early stages, but the demand for it is skyrocketing, pun intended. Experts believe that it will continue to grow at an incredible rate of around 40% every year from 2023 to 2030. So, with all this in mind, let's talk about what awaits us in the near future. There are different types of space tourism. First up, we have suborbital spaceflight. It's the trip where you reach an altitude of over 300,000 feet, which is way higher than any airplane can go. In fact, it's so high that you cross a special line called the Kármán line, which marks the boundary of outer space. How cool is that? So it's basically like a quick jump into space and back. So let's talk a bit more about suborbital spaceflight. Imagine you want to go on vacation to Sydney, but you live in London. Normally, it would take you about 22 hours to get there by plane. That's a really long time to sit on a plane. But guess what? Scientists and engineers are working on a new way of traveling that could make the journey from England to Australia super fast and exciting. Suborbital space trips could be used for quick travel between different cities on Earth. Instead of flying in a regular airplane, you would hop on a spacecraft that can go really, really fast. According to a recent study, in the near future, it might be possible to fly from London to Sydney in less than 2 hours. Just imagine how amazing that would be. You would zoom up into space, see the Earth from above, then come back down in no time at all. What an adventure! This study, conducted by the UK's Civil Aviation Authority, was all about understanding how our bodies react to trips outside Earth's atmosphere. To figure this out, the researchers needed some brave volunteers. They recruited 24 healthy people between the ages of 32 and 80. These volunteers were taken to a special training facility called an RAF centrifuge in Cranwell. A centrifuge is a big machine that looks like a giant spinning chair. The volunteers were sat in there to experience a simulation of spaceflight. They were spun around, and their bodies felt the pressure and changes in gravity that happen when you go into space. Almost everyone handled the simulation pretty well and quickly returned to normal. One person even briefly lost consciousness, but it was because of the gravitational forces, and they recovered soon after. Now, this study found some surprising things. Many people think that you have to be really fit and young to handle space flights. But the research showed that older people can actually cope better with all this gravity craziness. So even if we don't develop space tourism in the next decade or two, you'll still have a chance to visit space even when you get old. Right now, there are two big players in the suborbital spaceflight game: Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin. Both of these companies have rocket-powered systems that can take up to 6 passengers on a thrilling ride. Virgin Galactic has already had 4 successful flights, but they recently ran into some financial trouble. On the other hand, Blue Origin has flown 32 passengers on their new Shepard rocket. The catch is pretty obvious. Right now, space tourism is super expensive. Companies can charge a whopping £350,000 per seat for these flights. But don't worry, things are about to change soon. Experts believe that space tourism will grow in the coming decades. It will be kinda similar to what happened to airplanes. Right now, the cost of a quick trip to space is very high. But as time goes on, the prices will go down. Eventually, space tourism will become more affordable and accessible to people all around the world. That means not just our children, but many of us will have a chance to experience the wonders of space. As technology advances, we might even be able to plan rocket-powered holidays in the future. Can you imagine telling your friends that you went on a vacation to space? What a flex! And now, let's talk about orbital spaceflight. This is the real deal, where you get to spend more time in space. Instead of just a few minutes, you can spend anywhere from a few days to over a week up there. And we're not talking about a measly 300,000 feet anymore. We're talking about going over 1.3 million feet high. So whether you're up for a quick jump into space or a longer adventure orbiting our planet, space tourism has something for everyone. Sky is no longer the limit. But space tourism isn't all fun and games. There are some challenges we need to consider too. First off, let's talk about the environment. Launching spacecraft and rockets takes a lot of energy and can create air and noise pollution. This can seriously harm our atmosphere. We don't want to trade a cool space trip for a damaged planet, right? Next, there's the issue of safety. Space travel is still risky, and accidents can happen. Even with safety protocols in place, there's always a chance of something going wrong. And if it does, the consequences could be really, really bad. Yikes! Space debris is another concern. Every time a spacecraft is launched, it leaves behind debris that can stay in orbit for a long time. As more launches happen, the amount of debris keeps growing. This can cause problems for other spacecraft, and even small pieces of debris can cause damage. Space travel also requires a lot of resources like energy, fuel, and materials. Using up these resources too quickly could have long-term consequences for our planet and future generations. We need to make sure we're not depleting everything in our quest for space exploration. Oh, and let's not forget about all the legal stuff. The rules and regulations for space tourism are still evolving, and it's not always clear who should be responsible if something goes wrong. Plus, there are concerns about how space tourism might affect international space laws and treaties. We don't want legal chaos in the final frontier. And finally, to achieve our dream of taking spaceships like planes, we'll need better infrastructure and logistics. We'll need to build more spaceports where spaceships can take off and land. But don't worry, scientists are actively working to solve these problems. Remember, it's not just us who are excited about space tourism, even governments are joining the fun. Many countries are investing in space tourism too. It's a global phenomenon. So even though there's still a lot to develop in this industry, it's pretty obvious that the aviation industry might go through a big revolution. Traveling long distances would become much quicker and more exciting. And judging by the way development is going, the first big breakthrough in this area will be made in North America. So, get ready for a new era of travel. What an exciting time to be alive, right? The universe is calling, and it's time for us to answer. Stay tuned!
Architecture shapes the world around us. If I say Paris, the first thing that normally comes to mind is the image of the Eiffel Tower, right? But imagine if, instead of a tower, Paris's landscape was dominated by a huge guillotine. I bet our selfies would look quite different, huh? We'd have to cut some people out of the picture. Okay, never mind. A lot of famous landmarks almost look very different than they do today. So how about we take a trip down history lane and take a look at them? What American city is so loved that it had to be named twice? Why, it's New York, New York, of course. New York City's skyline is made out of many iconic structures. The most symbolic of them all is probably the Statue of Liberty. Now, there's a lot people don't know about this monument. Like the fact that it was originally copper-colored, but it turned green due to patina oxidation of the copper. More surprising curiosity about the statue is that it was almost modeled after an Egyptian woman. Historians say that Lady Liberty's sculptor was fascinated by Egyptian monuments. Apparently, this design existed, but it didn't go ahead due to its high cost. Well, that would have been a different sight, huh? Now here's a riddle for you. What is white, important, and houses presidents? You guessed it, it's the White House. One of the world's most important buildings. Its neoclassical design, large frontal pillars, and green lawn are something we're all very familiar with. Now, how about we delve into some historical archives and imagine what this house almost looked like? President George Washington opened and judged a competition for the design of the presidential residence. Several designs almost made it through. For instance, this simple yet classic design was submitted by Thomas Jefferson himself. Or this James Diamond design that suggested an entrance with two mirrored spiral staircases. The most famous of the rejected designs was Philip Hart's, which looked as if the executive mansion was double everything. It featured a 3-story building with 2 front balconies. It looks a bit too much, wouldn't you say? Washington ultimately chose James Hoban's design, an Irish architect that modeled the plans after the House of Parliament in Dublin, his hometown. And President Theodore Roosevelt gave it its nickname, the White House, in 1907. It's certainly difficult to imagine London without the iconic Tower Bridge. Opened in 1894, it took over 8 years, 70,000 tons of concrete, and 432 workers to build the monument. It works as a drawbridge, stopping traffic every time a big ship wants to waltz through the Thames. Horace Jones proposed the winning design, but many alternatives were rejected. Tower Bridge could have had an arch that connected both towers, but it could have also looked like the number 8 if you were looking at it from above. This figure-8 model proposed by F.J. Palmer was a popular one. The designer's main idea was not to stop pedestrian vehicle flow in case a ship needed to pass, so he proposed a loop system. Each loop would have retractable sections, so if a ship wanted to pass, one section could be retracted and the ship could enter the center of the loop. The ship would be stuck at the center of the loop, waiting for the other retractable side to open. Meanwhile, traffic would continue without interruption. Now, even if this could be something positive, the city didn't pick this design because of its extremely complex engineering. I mean, imagine trying to build something like that. Ah, the City of Lights. Or is it the City of Love? Or croissants? Paris is by far the world's most visited city by tourists. People seem to love staring at the Eiffel Tower and eating a delicious croissant while wearing a beret, don't they? Can you imagine Paris without the Eiffel Tower? More than 700 designs were submitted for consideration, and the winner was Gustav Eiffel's tower design. You can find a monstrous lighthouse and even a giant guillotine in the pile of rejected designs. You heard right. Some proposed designs were eccentric. A designer proposed that the monument should celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution, which to him meant building a guillotine. Hey, let's not lose our heads over this. French engineer Eugène Fresnay proposed the Lighthouse of the World, a 980 feet lighthouse with lights so bright that the entire city could read newspapers at night. Now imagine something as tall as the Empire State Building and the Eiffel Tower stacked on top of each other. It would have a spiraling ramp all around it from top to bottom. This way, cars could reach the top of the lighthouse. All along the way, a 2,000-seat restaurant would be ready to serve excited diners who would eat enjoying the best of views. Aren't you just glad these designs never saw the light of day? Meanwhile, did you know that Benjamin Franklin suggested that the U.S. national bird should be a turkey, and that the U.S. Capitol Hill had a turkey-looking statue on top of it? Well, in 1792, Thomas Jefferson held an architectural competition to decide on the Capitol building's design. Jefferson, an architect himself, was the judge of this competition. The current building's design appeared late in the competition, so late that George Washington, the president at the time, was starting to become impatient. Amongst all the terrible entries, one certainly stood out from the crowd. Instead of the Capitol's beautiful dome, amateur architect James Diamond designed a building with a bird on top of it. Now, in his defense, it was a weather vane, supposedly representing a bald eagle, but it sure didn't look like it. Finally, in 1793, William Thornton's design appeared and pleased President Washington. He believed the building was an expression of grandeur and beauty, everything he expected of a place that would house the American Congress. Now, moving back to Paris, Another monument looked a tad different than it is today. Strolling along the Champs-Élysées, you'd eventually stumble upon an iconic monument, the Arc de Triomphe. Napoleon commissioned this astonishing 160 feet tall arched monument to celebrate France's many victories. Jean Chalgrin, the landmark's architect, actually drew inspiration from a Roman monument, the Arco de Tito. However, 45 years before its construction, French architect Charles Ribot submitted another design, the so-called Elephant Triumphal. The design was, for lack of a better word, weird. You'd enter the elephant through its underbelly and find an astounding spiral staircase on the inside. The inside would be filled with extravagant decor and even a garden. The whole monument would stand 3 stories tall, and the original design even planned on installing a complex drainage system. Why? Because if you have an elephant monument in the middle of the city, it better spew water from its trunk. And in case you're wondering why the statue of an elephant was ever considered part of Paris's skyline, well, let's say it was due to a Renaissance-era fixation. Back then, elephants symbolized nobility and strength, everything the French were going for. Now, down under, Sydney's skyline almost looked like an entirely different landscape than the one we know today. In 1956, the city opened an international competition to choose a design for Sydney's new opera house. Danish architect Jorn Utzon eventually won the contest. He designed the sculptural, one-of-a-kind building we know today. Now, in second place, another design from the Philadelphian Cooperative Group almost made the cut. Their design was much more brutal than Utzon's. It was inspired by a nautilus shell and consisted in a spiral form. It had big, full-height windows and a roof made from folded concrete. It almost looked like a vertical dish rack. And what if I told you that back in Washington, Lincoln's memorial almost looked like a pyramid? The memorial's design was down to 2 architects, John Russell Pope and Henry Bacon. Congress brought home the Bacon's neoclassical style design, but Pope submitted some interesting sketches that never saw the light of day. Inspired by monuments and memorials from other cultures, Pope suggested that the Lincoln Monument be many different things. It could have looked like a 250 feet tall Greek Parthenon, or it could have been a colossal ziggurat, a classical Mesopotamian pyramid. Well, that would have been different. Hey, anybody seen that elephant in the room?
We all love unicorns, those legendary creatures famous for their beauty. You're now thinking of a white horse with a spiraling horn on its forehead, and there's probably a rainbow somewhere nearby. But what are the origins of this image? And more importantly, can it be true? Well, yes and no. Let us start from the beginning. The name. It comes from Latin. Unicorn translates as one horn. Today, there is one land animal that fits the bill, the rhinoceros. The Greek name for a unicorn is monoceros, which again means one horn, so it all fits neatly. But wait, isn't a unicorn a kind of horse? We need to call in science to resolve the issue. Scientists have discovered a skull of an animal that could have been the real unicorn and roamed the earth some 30,000 years ago. The animal resembled a huge, hairy rhinoceros, nothing like the image of a unicorn we have today. It was 2 times heavier than a giraffe, and its diet consisted of grass, a lot of grass. But the skull the scientists found in Central Asia revealed another surprising fact: the animal's age. Previous research pointed to the fact that the species went extinct 350,000 years ago. This meant that our ancestors never shared the same living space with this oversized rhinoceros. But the skull was dated much later. This dates the animal right around the time when humans were already there. This is where the legend begins. Imagine you're a prehistoric human who had just seen a unicorn. What would you do? It's not like you can take out a smartphone and snap a picture of it. No, you would probably paint it on a cave wall. Such drawings have survived to the present day. In France, there's an image of an animal that seems to have a single horn. It's in the Hall of the Bulls. All the other animals there have 2 wavy horns, but the mysterious spotted animal has 2 lines on its head. Do these double lines represent a single horn? Is this the famous unicorn? Perhaps. The name of the drawing is the unicorn panel. But images of unicorns don't only exist in cave drawings. In the Indus Valley, scientists have found various seals featuring a mythical animal with a single horn. Ancient Greek writers believed that unicorns lived in India. Back then, this region of the world was exotic to them. Although ancient Greeks never saw a unicorn, they had a pretty detailed description of the animal. They even recorded that the meat from this creature had a bitter taste. But was it a horse or a rhinoceros? Neither. For Greeks, the unicorn was a kind of a donkey. Go figure. In Chinese mythology, there's a similar creature. Its name translates into English, means male-female. The animal's description resembles a unicorn. A single horn on its forehead, the tail of an ox, and the body of a deer. It feeds on vegetation, just like the ancient rhinoceros from Central Asia. When the first giraffe was presented to the Ming Emperor, they described it as a unicorn. The ruler concluded that the animal definitely wasn't the mythical unicorn, but the legend lived on in that part of the world. The modern Japanese word for giraffe comes from the Chinese word for the unicorn-like creature. Ancient Persians also knew about the existence of unicorns. There's a picture of a unicorn in their capital city, but the fun part is that it has two large wings. Seems odd, but the Persians also never saw a unicorn in person. For them, like for the Greeks, it was a being that lived outside the known world. That's the reason why we're so fascinated by unicorns today. We find accounts of such creatures in the writings of Aristotle and even Julius Caesar. These famous people claimed that animals resembling unicorns lived in the forests of Germany. The modern image of a unicorn originated in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance in Europe. People back then had quite the imagination. They showed unicorns in book decorations. According to ancient scribes, this animal was ferocious. Its main enemy was the elephant. The people in medieval times thought highly of an animal they had never seen. It was quick and dangerous, so it needed to be hunted down. But how on earth do you lure a unicorn? With the help of a fair maiden, of course. This sounds strange today, but keep in mind that the Dark Ages were a peculiar period in history. Back then, doctors used leeches as legit medical treatment. The perfect setting for the myth about the unicorn. The story gets wilder. A maiden would go inside a forest. A unicorn would spot her and jump inside her lap. After it fell asleep, hunters would appear. They would then capture the unicorn and take it to the king. But why were Europeans impressed by the unicorn? Because of its horn. They believed that it had magical power. A unicorn's horn could detect poison in food and drinks. When you ground it into a powder, the horn had the power to whiten teeth. These were just some of the magical traits given to a unicorn's horn. The folklore was so strong that Europeans even had a backup for the times they couldn't get their hands on a real horn. That must have happened quite often, and they used real narwhal horns as a replacement. These are whales with a large, tusk-like tooth coming from their mouth. In England, the unicorn was a symbol of something you could never see or catch. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it became associated with imagination. That's when the rainbow came into the picture. The Victorians were the first to connect the symbol of a rainbow to the unicorn. Its first appearance in fantasy literature was in the novel Through the Looking Glass for young readers. That was the sequel to Lewis Carroll's more famous work, Alice in Wonderland. The unicorn now stood for hope and purity. Still, there were no recorded sightings of the animal in real life. At least none that could be confirmed by science. In 1663, a German scientist claimed to have found a unicorn skeleton. The story seemed too good to be true, and it was. Someone made the skeleton from the bones of various animals and tried to pass it off as a unicorn. Today, the fake skeleton is displayed in the local Natural History Museum. The people weren't gonna give up and searched for unicorns everywhere they went. In the 20th century, a British explorer discovered a new species in Africa. It had a small bump in the corner of its head. The public nicknamed the mysterious animal the African unicorn. But this wasn't true. Now we know this is an okapi. It's most closely related to a giraffe, but it looks like a zebra in the back part of its body, and its head resembles a deer. It's an impressive animal, but it's not even close to the elusive unicorn. One of the latest alleged sightings happened in 1991. An Austrian biologist reported seeing a unicorn in a forest in Germany. The legend says that these animals live in enchanted forests, but there's just one tiny issue: the total lack of physical evidence. In fact, there are historians who claim that unicorns never existed. The animal was simply a misinterpretation of cave drawings. Perhaps all those ancient images of unicorns were just two horned animals shown from the side. It could be so. It's hard to add the third dimension to a 2D image. But then, in 2013, the unicorn reappeared. Not the animal, though the word. An American venture capitalist came up with the term to refer to startup companies with a value of over $1 billion. She chose this word because these companies are as rare as the mythical animal. There are only 1,000 of such enterprises in the whole world, and